Clayton has
Everyone
has
out there. Hello, we're live, by the way, Jacob. Don't you say anything inappropriate. Here we go.
Inches to go. Debater. 17 to 14. Cowboys out in front. Star begins to count. Takes the snap. He's got the quarterback taking each and the Green Bay Packers are going to be world champions.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Packers Total Access. My name is Clayton. You can check us out on Packernet.com. You can find me on Twitter at Packers_access. If you'd like to email the show, you can send a message to PackersTotalAccess@gmail.com. Today's show is brought to you by Fertile Ground Ranch Discipleship Ministry, helping those in the community that are kind of coming out of a rough or addictive past. And if you guys want to help that cause, you can actually go to my Twitter page, and there will be a tweet that's pinned at the top of the page. And that'll actually enter you into a contest to win a free Quay Walker autographed jersey. But also attached to that tweet, like I said, is a link to that cause. For every $5 that you donate to that ministry, that'll enter you into the contest one additional time outside of retweeting that tweet that's pinned and also following the account. We're going to be giving that away here in the next 7 days, so make sure you get yourself entered into that contest to win that autographed Quay Walker jersey. Now, we got a special show for you guys today. You know, I think everybody would agree that this season's been a little bit weird, right? A little bit different for us Packer fans. So what we decided to do is why don't we crank up here and let's look ahead a little bit to the 2023 season. There's been plenty of content all week, whether it's people like me defending Aaron Rodgers, people like others that are bashing Aaron Rodgers, people that think the whole thing should be tore down. Other people think that we're just one or two pieces away. I think everybody's correct in a certain sense. But why don't we kind of look ahead to the 2023 season and see, okay, what's the cap situation actually look like? And I think people are going to be pretty surprised because all you hear from a certain group of people on Twitter is that, I mean, you'd read their tweets and how they cherry pick certain information. You think the Packers are going to have to sell and move out of Green Bay, right? I mean, it's just the way it looks. But when you really dig into it, you can kind of see what their vision was. Not saying it was right. Honestly, hindsight being 2020, looking back, it was probably wrong, but we're going to kind of dive into it. So with that being said, that's kind of the basis of this podcast, this live show here on Twitter and YouTube. Appreciate everybody hopping in and hanging out with us today. But we've got on here from Cheese and Packers, Mr. JJ Leahy. And then we've got from the Packernet Fantasy Podcast, Jacob himself is going to be on here for a short time on the beginning. Little cap tip there. I like it. I like it a lot. All right. So morning in the chat there, Goose. Let's do it, guys. Let's talk about it. First of all, opening remarks. It sounds like a court case, right? Let's go here. Jacob, you're going to have to get off a little early. So if you want to kick off, you can. Just maybe kind of a brief overview. Nothing crazy detailed, but when you look at the 2023 roster coming up and kind of where the team sits, what's the first two or three things that come to mind? I think that'd be a good way to start.
Sure. And I'm going to, as always, try to be kind of the layman here. Because I'm going to be honest, I don't quite understand the cap situation. I was looking at SpotTrack and trying to look at some of these numbers. Real quick before we get into that, can you explain what the 2022 dead cap hits? Because as I'm scrolling through that, you know, I see the guys like Zadarius Smith pops up that have an $11 million cap hit. Does that now mean that because we ended our contract with him prematurely that we were on the line for that amount of money in this year's overall budget? Is that what that basically means?
Yeah, so, and I do want to say exactly what Jacob said just now, guys. None of this is like set in stone. What I've always found out being a Packer fan, and it's one of the reasons why I've turned away from the cap a little bit, is everybody who comments on it have never been 100% correct. There's always little details that gets either swept under the rug or not talked about, or oh, this roster bonus popped up. Oh, wait, right here they had a restructure. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So we're not going to bore people with too many details. But to answer your question about Zadarius Smith, as I'm trying to pull it up here, what's cool is that comes off the cap next year. So there's nothing on Zadarius next year. But this year, you're exactly correct. So basically, this year's cap, $11.4 million towards the cap this year in 2022, okay? $5.8 million from Billy Turner, $3 million from Kevin King. Okay. Now, why do I mention that? Because back when Ryan was saying we did go all in, when everybody was going, I don't understand why they don't go all in. This is what he was talking about. Okay. We did go all in. Basically, what it came down to is you having to cut Zadarius mainly because they were trying to work out the deal there with Tay as well. But by severing ties with Za'Darius, that hurt us on the cap this year. What's cool is when you look ahead, Jacob, to 2023, obviously Za'Darius is not on there. And it's funny, this is what I kind of always refer to, and I'm going to turn it back over to you real quick, Jacob. We always hear about how, it's going to catch up to us. It's going to catch up to us. I don't think anybody this offseason was coming into this year going, yeah, we just don't have the cap room to do what we want. I mean, for God's sakes, they offered Tay more money than Vegas did, right? And then immediately the argument goes to, well, that's going to hurt us next year. Guys, 2023's dead cap money is only $54,000. And yes, there are avoidable years tacked on. We're going to talk about that as we get into the 2023 roster. But everyone who always says it's going to catch up with us, there's not been a team that it's caught up with yet. Some people would say the Saints. However, nobody was looking at the Saints this year and going, man, they ain't going to be able to field a good roster. I remember going into the season thinking, oh, man, you got Kamara. They got Jameis Winston, quarterback that was definitely their quarterback of choice right now. They still got Michael Thomas on the roster. There's, they went out. Who was it they got? The Jarvis Landry, right? They went and got Jarvis Landry. So we got to slow down with that. And I love hearing Ryan here recently how he kind of talks about, I don't think it's going to be doom and gloom like everyone else, because it really isn't. But did that answer your question, Jacob?
Yeah, that did. And I guess going forward, as I'm looking at some of the numbers, just real quick, like you said, a brief summary. I'm one of those people that I'm kind of the tear it down, burn it all to the ground, start it over, to the point where I'm looking at the top 5 people that we pay right now: Rodgers, Bakhtiari, Smith, Clark, and Lowry. I'm thinking I maybe keep Clark, and even Clark lately hasn't been, the money that he got. I was expecting more of an Aaron Donald type player there. So basically 4 out of those 5 guys I can either restructure. I don't mind. I mean, Rodgers, I'm done with him. Bakhtiari, I hate to say it, but I just don't feel like that his knee, even if his heart's in it, I don't think his knee's in it anymore. And he's getting to be that, Packers rarely give that third contract type thing with a guy that's missed years now. I just don't feel confident in that. I mean, even at guys like Amos Alexander Jones is an interesting topic where, like you said, I am one of those people that thought, we're going to have to get rid of Jones at some point. Now I'm one of those people where it's like, figure out how to restructure this guy and keep him.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a pretty popular opinion, to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of people I say pretty popular. I don't think it's the majority, but there's a large group of people out there that are saying, hey, look, let's just tear it down, right? And let's just move on to you, JJ. Just a brief kind of overview, and that was a great explanation there, Jacob. I like what you said. It was very concise. As we get ready to dig into all the numbers, I want to get your all's take, and then I'll kind of lay out what I think, and then we'll throw ideas back and forth and see what we come up with. But go ahead, JJ. How do you kind of see 2023, from a 20,000-foot bird's eye view?
Real quick, who says you need to grow a beard, Clayton? Apparently me and JJ are making you look like a little boy. It's
funny, man. I shave, though, and I get a different look from Mandy, so I'm going to keep shaving. You know what I'm saying? That's the most important. Anyway, go ahead.
All right. Well, obviously, the biggest question is, what do the Packers actually want to do? Because there have been a bunch of times leading up to today where I felt like there was a pretty clear path forward to how the roster and the cap should be handled, and the Packers had a very different plan. So I do want to be a little cautious as we are laying out like a path to, well, here's how you put together the best roster, or here's how you clear the most cap space, or whatever, because the Packers have a vision for what they want to do, and they're going to move heaven and earth to make that happen. And I think that they could surprise us, because they have been surprising us the last few years. So that's my big asterisk on everything we talk about today, is that the Green Bay Packers seem to like nothing better in the world than to make all of us armchair experts waste our time and look pretty silly talking about, well, here's how you could accomplish this thing that is not their plan in the slightest.
Yep, absolutely. Very well said.
Same with the draft.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. Same exact thing, man, because I was looking at the draft going, all right, man, we're definitely getting a safety early. We need a safety bad. Man.
It seems so obvious.
Yeah. and then they come up and they get an inside linebacker or a defensive line and inside linebacker. It's like, what? Where did that come? And I don't know. This isn't going to be a roster evaluation episode. We're hoping that we can come away and keep this somewhat numbers, but there's going to be
just about to go down a Quay Walker Avenue right there. Is that what's going on in your head?
My gosh, that and Stokes, another first-round pick, Savage, another first-round pick. It's like, I know we all say and we think that, man, Goody drafts really well, and the Packers always have drafted well. But, man, you look at the people that are struggling this year, I mean, right across the board. Alexander, obviously, is your best corner, hands down, but Stokes, man, a 53.7. I mean, he's the 22nd lowest graded defender on the roster. And then when you look at Quay right now, 50.4, he's the 25th lowest graded defender on the roster, right? I mean, I love to defend Goody, and Goody we trust. That's me typically, right? But
yeah,
man, you gotta really acknowledge the things that have happened this year, and it's getting overshadowed by Rodgers talk. It really is. But
that's one of the things that worry me. If I am, which I just said I'm one of the guys that wants to do the burn it down and build it up. Well, in order to do that, you need to have quality young players that can become the staples of your team. And I thought we had that in guys like Gary, Stokes, Savage. And I mean, just look at what happens in a couple of games. We lose half those guys, or else they're just completely falling off. So it's,
and to me, all the signs point to the Packers scheme has been somewhat figured out. It doesn't mean you scrap the whole scheme, but I feel like they came into this year thinking, we're going to do what we did last year, and we're going to cruise to 13 wins. And you're seeing it across the league with this style of offense. Now, the young bucks that have come in, your Seattles, your Miamis, your Cincy's, your Minnesotas, those guys are putting their own spin on it. I went back and watched the Seattle tape a couple weeks ago because I was like, what are they doing? Like, and I'm expecting to see everything that everybody's talking about on Twitter with Shanahan motion and this and that, right? And I'm going, okay, let's sit down. They had a great game, and I put on the tape. In the very first play, guess what they did? 11 gun empty. They came out in an empty set and spread it out wide. And I was like, oh, my God, this is not what I expected to see, right? So let's do this. You talked about Bakhtiari. First of all, according to Over the Cap, as far as restructures, they have this really cool thing that's called restructure potential, okay? You've got the effective cap space number of $5.3 million in the red, okay? Now, simple restructures, it's saying that the Packers have $49 million in simple restructures, which would result in a $43.7 million possible cap space. Now, let's go extreme like the Saints did, right? Maximum restructures. As far as maximum restructure, $71.7 million, which would put your cap at $66.4 million in the green. Obviously, I don't even want to go with that middle number. I want to keep doing what we've been doing, but we got to evaluate the roster a little bit better. So when we talk about Bakhtiari, which you brung up, Jacob, okay, this is a article I pulled up. I can't remember who posted. I'm going to read it real quick. He says, there's no guaranteed money left for the Packers to pay. Therefore, the dead money would be exclusively prorated, signing and restructure bonuses already paid that haven't hit the cap yet. If the Packers decide to trade or release him in 2023, they would incur a $23.1 million in dead money. However, the movement would open up $6 million of cap space. So they would gain $6 million if they just cut Bakhtiari loose or traded him, okay? And almost $33 million in 2024. That space would guarantee financial health for the final years of Aaron Rodgers' career and facilitate extensions with Elton Jenkins, who would be the immediate replacement at left tackle, Rashawn Gary, and Adrian Amos. Now, Amos, I don't feel like's on that list. This article was written back in August. The other contractual option is for the Packers to keep Bakhtiari in 2023, hoping he can regain his old form. Then there would be another window to get out of the contract in 2024. If the Packers don't restructure Bakhtiari again next offseason, the dead money in 2024 would be $11.5 million. Sounds bad, right? Wrong. It's going to free up $21 million in cap if they cut him next year. So the Bakhtiari debate now becomes, do you want Bakhtiari on your roster? Because you can make it work and there's room to restructure, right? My answer personally, if he's healthy, yes. That's a big if, right? Now, will we all agree that he's better off this year than he was last year health-wise? I mean, it's not nothing to write home about, but he's trending in that direction. And in my opinion, too, as far as tier of positions, I had it wrote down here. That top tier on offense is quarterback and left tackle. Now, I was talking with Coach Hahn in a separate chat yesterday, and I asked him, what position do you find most valuable in the offensive line? And he immediately said, well, you'd like to think left tackle because it's protecting your quarterback's blind side.
Did he say
But think
center?
about this, though. If you take all that money that's tied up in one guy that we've seen can go down with an injury, and you spread that out over the entire offensive line, I don't think we're having the guard problems that we had early in the season. I mean, I kind of see how we could spread that out. Now, do I think we run Bakhtiari out of town? I don't. I really don't. I think you keep him on the roster if he's healthy. I think there's a chance he retires. There's also a chance that Aaron Rodgers retires. And this whole pod should be done with the caveat of, listen, if Aaron Rodgers retires and Bach retires, this whole thing changes completely, right? And we'll get to that. Actually, let's just talk about it real quick as we get ready to lay the whole roster out. And I'm going to turn it over to you, JJ. What happens if Aaron Rodgers retires? There's a lot of stuff floating out there on Twitter and has everybody confused. The people that hate Rodgers immediately want to say he's making $50 million a year. Okay, if you talk about the overall contract, yes. Now, I immediately go to, but his cap hit's only $28 million. What are you talking about? Well, that's not the total contract. Well, if he retires, he's not getting the total contract. Like, what are you talking about? Now, this is what it says. If Rodgers were to walk away, he would forfeit all his rights to the $59.4 million in guaranteed salary for next year. In order to best accommodate the hit on the salary cap, my assumption would be that the Packers and Rodgers would sign a new contract where the option bonus was eliminated and just a $1.1 million salary remained. That would reduce Rodgers' salary cap charge to $16.9 million and would carry him on the roster as a procedural move until June 2nd. At that point, they would put him on the retired list. The salary cap charge in that case would be $15.8 million in 2023, $24.4 in 2024. So if you take and you look, JJ, at the salary cap for 2023, Aaron Rodgers' cap hit is $31.6 million. If he retires, you basically drop that down $15 million. So you drop that down $15 million. Let's just call it 15 for easy math. So you're freeing up $15 million in cap right there. We don't even know what the overall savings would be for Bakhtiari retiring, simply because nobody wrote an article on it yet, right? We just know that they could cut loose with him starting next year, actually this year, and gain $6 million. Now, according to Spotrac, the cap space for 2023 right now, we are $3.1 million in the hole. Guys, that is nothing. Like, I just told you how we could free up $40 million in simple restructures, right? Not that we should do all those restructures, but you could run it back and just draft players, right? And have this whole roster intact. My question is, are we happy with this roster? Because I know I'm not. Now, the two huge components for me, the most important, is definitely quarterback and left tackle. Those are my top tiers, right? Quarterback, Aaron Rodgers grades out as a 76.4 with a bum thumb right now. He's the fourth highest graded player on our offense. Okay, so he's a top 5 offensive player at a 76.4. Bakhtiari, 78.7, is the third highest graded player on our roster. So we're basically saying we're going to get rid of one of our best players at the most important position, 2 different positions. So that's how I'm looking at it. I want to hear your take, though, JJ, because I know you're a lot more future-minded. You're probably leaning more toward Jacob than I am. But let's hear what you got to say about that, just what we just kind of covered with Bach, Aaron, all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, so we have a little bit of a hiccup before we move forward, and that is that so Spotrac and Over the Cap don't agree with each other at all. So Spotrac has us at negative $3 million for 2023, and Over the Cap has us at positive $3 million. I always use Over the Cap because the people who are smarter than me, I'm talking mainly guys like Ken Ingalls on Twitter, swear by it, and kind of publicly say, distrusting things about Spotrac. So that's why I always use Over the Cap. I don't have anything other than their word to verify why Over the Cap is better, but right. but I do trust him. So the other thing, looking at what Over the Cap says about Aaron Rodgers' contract, and this is why trying to make any sort of projections about the future and how his contract is handled is so hard is because so few details are publicly available about his contract. So,
Bingo.
you know what? One of the things that I have a hard time even kind of getting past is like how much cash has already been paid out to him that we're still on the hook for cap wise.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're looking at according to Over the Cap that he's been paid out 125 million bucks in 2022 that we have to be on the hook for over the next couple of years. Now, I don't know. Retirement is the one area of contract and cap relation that I'm very, very murky on. Is how does retirement affect things?
We
I
all
do
are.
know. Exactly. I do totally understand the relationship between whether a guy is designated to retire post June 1. Like that makes total sense to me that you're trying to roll that over into the next league year. But I know that when you cut or trade a guy, you can't prorate money out into future years. It all has to incur that year, which is why doing it after June 1 matters, because after June 1 is technically the following cap year. So,
Right.
so that's one of those things that like I have a hard time getting very far down the road of what the heck you do with his contract at all, because with the details we have, as you said, it doesn't make a lot of sense. There's so much that is just only privately known between Rodgers and his agent and the team.
Yeah.
But I find it basically impossible to imagine that Russ Ball and Mark Murphy would have signed us to any sort of a contract where if he retires, we're actually on the hook for over $100 million in 1 year. Like they built in stuff to protect them so that if he decides that to hang it up and he's done, that we're in a better spot. So, as bad as the public numbers look, I don't look at it and feel any alarm or concern, because I'm like, well, that's just not realistic. It's not possible for it to be this bad, which means that there's good news we just don't know about.
Right. And, to go back to that, when it was first reported, there was this feud between Pat McAfee and Ian Rappaport on the McAfee show. And they literally had Ian Rappaport on there. And Ian Rappaport was reporting Aaron Rodgers' contract totally different from other players. And Pat McAfee kept pointing it out, going, well, here's a report where you reported, insert, player's name, contract that was just extended. Why didn't you word it the same exact way you did Aaron's, right? And basically what Ian said was it's a 3-year extension worth $150 million. It's a $50 million a year contract. Now, where did Ian get that information? He didn't get it from Mark Murphy. He didn't get it from Russ Ball. He didn't get it from Brian Gutekunst. He got it from Aaron's agency. The agent will always try to pump the numbers up. Why do they do that? They want the simplest form of this is how much this player is worth this year. And they wanted to set the bar at $50 million. So they did. So when I ask people, and I try not to be an a-hole about it, but people get so aggressive and so cocky. And it's like, I literally say, okay, well, he's $28 million against the cap this year. How's he a $50 million contract? It's going to catch us later. I just read to you what happens when he retires. So what they did, and this is what Ian wrapped the report up with. He says, at the end, he said, this was a very, very, what was the word he used? Creative way that the Packers could allow Rodgers to retire as a Packer and them protect themselves for the future. It was he made it sound unique. Now, what did Aaron say? Okay, let's get Aaron's take. Aaron said it's a 1 plus a 2 with the option of a 3. That to me sounds like at any point when he wants to retire in the next 3 years, the Packers come pretty clean off the hook, with the exception, I say clean, but you're talking about $15 million. It's not clean. Let's not overblow it here. However, it's doable, right? Now, when you talk about 28 million towards the cap this year, 31 next year, I've sent tweet after tweet out there about, where does he rank in the entire NFL? And you got people like Ryan Tannehill costing more against the cap than Aaron Rodgers. I'm sorry, I'm taking Aaron all day, but that hopefully explains to people what JJ's saying is nobody knows the details if Aaron retires. But I promise you this, when Aaron retires, we're not going to look up and go, oh my God, there's some people saying that we're going to have a $90 million cap hit next year. And then the same people are going, that's why you should trade him. If you trade him, you're going to have a $90 million cap hit, because that was the agreement between the Packers and Aaron was, okay, you remember he kept saying lame duck, I don't want to be a lame duck quarterback. That's what he meant. He wanted them to commit to him for, 3 years and say, hey, yeah, we want you to retire as a Packer. The decision's already been made. So I don't want to come across as like believe the way I believe and pounding the table. It's not an option to trade Aaron Rodgers. It's just not. They made their decision. Aaron made his decision. Now we move forward. He either retires or he doesn't is really what it comes down to. So,
right.
And
I totally understand, his motivation in structuring it that way, to where you get penalized if you cut me. You get penalized to the tune of $99 million and some change. It does completely put him in the driver's seat, and this is why the big question we got to sit down and try and assess is he going to be back next year? And I don't know why he would come back, because
I don't either.
You look at his level of play, and you can defend it and say that, well, he's still good, but the thing is, he's not Aaron Rodgers good. He's not good by his own standards. You look at his grades; they're one of the worst of his career. Yes, it's still good, but I think that if you're Aaron Rodgers, you're looking at this and considering, if I come back next year, I might tarnish my legacy. And I think even he might even look at like the last couple of years of Peyton Manning, which were yes, successful, but still like kind of sad to watch. Like, he was not the Peyton Manning that we had all been watching for
like
all those
Brady
years.
this year. I mean,
Brady this year. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, they're in first place in their division now.
God,
Ain't that crazy? Anyway, go ahead, JJ.
Has Brady ever not won his division? Has he ever won a wild card? I feel like he's always won his division.
That's a great question.
But it's like at this point, it's like witchcraft. Now I know everybody in the world would have pointed to the NFC South and said, yeah, they're all going to stink this year, except for maybe the Bucks. But then it is crazy that the Bucks have a losing record and they're still first place in their horrible division.
Yeah. Jacob, thoughts, man. Go ahead. I got to step away for just a second, but you go ahead, man. I know you got to get off here in a second.
Yeah, I just got a few minutes, but that's fine because I can actually I just got a list of the unrestricted free agents coming up, and I guess I can bounce off of JJ there. So I'll just read off a few of these names here, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Amos, Cobb, Lowry, Crosby, Lazard, Tanyan, Jaron Reed, Mercedes Lewis, our newfound free agent Jonathan Abrams, Sammy Watkins, Elton Jenkins, Levitt, Ford, Wilson, Nixon, Tyler Davis is a restricted free agent. Out of that list, who do you think is most pressing that we need to re-sign, if either?
Go ahead, JJ.
I
know my answer. It's for the right price, none, unless it is the right price.
That's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, go ahead, JJ.
Well, I think that there's a couple guys the Packers are obviously going to try and bring back. Elton Jenkins being very near the list, despite his level of play this year. I think they still believe in him. I would imagine they're going to try and bring back Rudy Ford for sure. You mentioned some guys, other guys on Ford's level, like I think you mentioned Dallin Levitt.
Yeah.
I think that those guys are going to be back. I think the Packers like them. They're cheap. Yeah. The way they have played this year has given you confidence in them moving forward, but it's not going to catch anybody else's attention and earn them any big contracts anywhere else.
You think Nixon's done enough to get him re-signed?
Personally, I would re-sign him. I like Nixon.
Me too.
But also I think that he's a guy. He's a guy. If he's not back, you're not going to cry.
And if you sign him, that pretty much completes your cornerback room for the most part. What I have is numbers that are set at minimums, right? Like quarterback, two on the roster, 3 halfbacks, 5 receivers, 4 tight ends, 8 offensive linemen. These are all minimums, bare minimums that you want to break camp with right on the roster. And there is an open spot there at corner. If you get Keyshawn Nixon at a discounted price, I'm all about it, right? But then again, what if you go out and find someone better? right? I mean, what if Goody does go shopping? He is going to go shopping. That's what's going to blow people's minds. It's not going to be crazy. He's in the hunt for the top free agents. That ain't going to happen. But we're negative 3.1 million in the cap right now. They're going to do some restructures. If this is assuming that Aaron comes back, right? Aaron and Bach come back. There will be restructures done. You know, isn't it amazing they were talking about how we were in such cap hell, but somehow we're 6 million over the cap right now? Like, how did this happen, guys? I'm telling you, if you follow the people that tweet that stuff, typically they're doom and gloomers.
Fake news.
Yeah, I mean, literally, just watch their tweets. I don't know how many times I've had it topped out and had to delete it. I'm struggling on Twitter right now. And
Well, I mean, hang on a second, 'cause I am one of those people. So let me defend. Let me defend for a second.
Mhm.
I'm not saying we can't field a football team next year. I am saying I don't want to be the freaking Saints. The Saints stink. The Saints are in absolute purgatory. I think their GM is an idiot. He does draft some good guys, but I think that he does a really bad job of managing their cap. The Saints kind of get worse every year. They can't afford to field a Super Bowl contender team. They're always just good enough to like play spoiler for some other teams, and that's it. That's their ceiling. They can't always retain everybody that they would like to retain, you know, and they'll you know say whatever they need to say, and they'll keep some guys and keep pushing money out further and further. But all they're doing is they are just extending the period of how long they're going to be mediocre. They can't they can't actually build one of the top rosters, and I have no interest in doing that. I don't have any interest in like being the Steelers either, where you're trying to prop up your Hall of Fame quarterback with kind of a subpar roster with one or two superstars like TJ Watt that you kind of are really fortunate to have on your team, because you know we're seeing the second TJ Watt is out with injury, they can't win a game. They are a horrible defense. They go from being one of the best defenses to a horrible defense just with the subtraction of one guy. And like, I'm sorry, that's not the world I want to live in. I don't want to be an ankle biter team. So no, I'm not doom and gloom in the sense that, yeah, I think we're going to have to sell the franchise and we can't bring back Rashawn Gary and stuff. Yeah, you're going to prioritize guys like Rashawn Gary. And then on the rest of the roster, you're going to be starting guys like Keyshawn Nixon at CB2 and you know, trying to spin it that's going to be good enough. And I'm just saying, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and I don't see it that way, because when I look at the roster, our cornerback room, let's use that specifically because you mentioned Keyshawn. Not that you know, that was a definite statement. I'm not saying that, but
it probably was a bad example.
Yeah, exactly. But like let's go through the positions. Let's just do it. And Jacob, you hop off whenever you have to. You interject whenever you
I probably got to leave right now. I got to be to work in 18 minutes, and I got to hop in the shower and try to look presentable.
No speeding tickets, all right?
Nah, I'm good. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys. Nice beard, JJ. Clayton, get on that.
I will. I'll start growing it, man.
All
Hey,
right.
give me some of that oil, man. Have a good day, bud.
See you guys.
See you. All right, so let's start with quarterback position, right? Aaron Rodgers, like I said, 76.4, graded out the fourth best player on the roster. Jordan Love, 62.1, graded out as the 11th best player. Now, obviously, it's a very minute sample size. If Rodgers comes back, there's your quarterback room next year, right? We agree on that?
Well, yeah.
Okay. Halfback, Aaron Jones, 83.7. He is the highest graded player on the Packers' entire roster, to the best of my knowledge. He's unless maybe Gary's rated higher. No, it's Aaron Jones.
It is Aaron Jones.
So
yeah.
He is your best player on offense. And I hear people saying his cap hit's so high, we're just going to have to trade him or cut him. We're just going to have to trade him or cut him. This is a part of that restructure potential, right? Aaron Jones, I'm not saying that we should push money out 4 or 5 years, but over the length of the contract, at least until he's 31 or 32, do what you got to do to keep him on the roster, in my opinion. I mean, unless you want to completely scrap it down, which I'm definitely not in that ballpark, right? A.J. Dillon and Kylan Hill are on the roster too. So your halfback room is set if Kylan Hill is healthy, if all these guys are healthy. And keep in mind, too, guys, listening on the pod especially, there's going to be practice squad players with future contracts, things like that, what they call futures contracts. There's going to be a lot of other things that come into play. But the way it sits right now, there's 40 players under contract, according to Spotrac. And, you know, you need basically 53, but 51 is the magic number because the top 51 players are what counts against the cap. Okay, so the wide receiver room, JJ, I think we would agree quarterback and halfback's kind of set if Rodgers comes back. Wide receiver room is what's got me like, man, this is a mess. You've got Christian Watson, a 59.1. He's 19th on the offensive side of the ball. Amari Rodgers, 55.0. He's 23rd on the offensive side of the ball. Romeo Doubs is the highest graded returning receiver, 60.6. He's 14th on the roster. And then Samori Toure, 52.0. He's 25th. You've got one spot open there at least unless you carry 6. If there's going to be a position that they spend a little money in, it's probably going to be a receiver. How do you feel about the receiver room moving forward? Obviously, those guys are all under contract. They're dirt cheap. What would be your action towards the receiving?
That's a good question. Because I'm also trying to answer that question through the predictive lens of what I think the Packers will do, and not just what I would do if I was GM.
Right.
I still kind of wouldn't be surprised if they spend another early draft pick on wide receiver, particularly if Aaron is back, because there doesn't seem to be any concealing of the fact that Aaron is frustrated with the wide receivers he was given, and that he seems to want a little bit more than what he has. You listen to his comments on Pat McAfee. He seems to be very frustrated with the core guys that he's working with. If you get if Randall Cobb comes back as opposed to retiring, which I think probably is on the table, he probably would at least consider retiring. If he comes back, I think that helps. And you're looking for a good second year leap from Watson and Doubs at the very least. I still think that if Aaron comes back, I think he's going to insist on making another addition. Somebody to replace the Sammy Watkins roster spot, I think makes sense. And whether that is a veteran, which is I think is what he would like, or Goody would probably prefer to have a rookie on there. Somebody that he can scout and have on a cheap contract, and they can bring him in and develop. I think there is going to be a little bit of a battle of the wills there on how you handle it. But I think that if Rodgers is back, I think you probably bring in somebody else. If Rodgers is not back and Jordan Love is under center, which we both said we're more on the side of we're not really sure why Aaron would come back for 2023 as opposed to retiring. If he doesn't come back, I think they probably bring in some sort of a veteran free agent to replace Cobb and Watkins, because I don't super think that either of those guys are back. They certainly could be. But at that point, I think that Goody might be willing to roll with the guys he has and let them continue to develop. That's just kind of my thinking. I know that he really likes his guys that he drafted. And if you don't have a Hall of Fame quarterback, banging the table and saying, get me another wide receiver, I'm not sure that you have a ton of incentive in a year where Jordan Love is your starter and you're not actually thinking it's Super Bowl or bust this year. I'm not sure you have any incentive to bury any of your young guys on the roster behind any kind of a high-priced veteran free agent. Yeah,
absolutely. And immediately I want to go to the free agent list, but I don't want this pod to turn in that direction because we're going to get down to a rabbit hole and never finish it, right? But that's what's so fun about this.
It'll be next Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That sounds good. So as far as wide receiver for me, you've got to have a number one. JJ, I had to eat some serious crow, man. When Devontae, I almost said when
I'll just stop you for a second here because I know what you're about to say, and I'm 100% right there with you. You and I were in the same spot. Now we're in the same spot together, and I got to eat the same crow as you. So I know what you're going to say, and I'm co-signing everything.
Yeah, we're in this sinking boat together here. So, coming into this year, I almost said when they let Devontae go, they didn't let Devontae go. Devontae basically kicked and screamed and said, I want to go to Vegas. And I respect the fact that Goody allowed it to happen rather than holding his feet to the fire and saying, no, you're having to stay here. I don't think that would be good for anybody. And the fact that they got the compensation they did. Now, when we look at the results from the compensation, I'm like, oh boy. And this is where it gets to, I love draft picks, JJ, but man, if you could trade a first round pick and get somebody that's been proven year after year after year, I kind of feel like it fixes some of our problems. But with that being said, at the receiver position, what I was going to say is I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. I thought Tay leaves, schematically, everything will be just fine. He'll spread the ball around, and he has. I mean, that's what I pointed out in the last game. There was an ungodly. I think he tied, or he was one short of the NFL record, which was set by the Packers for how many receivers caught a ball in a single game. Like the ball's getting spread around. It's just you don't have that player that's going to make a huge difference. I want to go to the chat here real quick. It's been sitting for a minute. Goose said, 3 roster moves I would make is trade Bach if possible, extend Jones, and move on from Rodgers. If I had another 3, it's finding a receiving tight end, sign a safety, and another veteran. Sign a safety, try another vet at wide receiver. So trading Bach is definitely an option, right? Cutting him is an option too. Extending Jones, I'm 120% on board with you, Goose. I think we should do that. When I say extend, I don't mean, extend the contract. I mean restructure it in a way that he's happy that he stays with the Packers and we reduce that cap hit a little bit. And it's not going to be anything crazy. It's going to be something like moving $2 million out over the next 3 years and it's done. I mean, it's that simple to get that cap space filled up or, back. So as far as a receiving tight end, moving on to our next position, well, wide receiver, we do need a number 1 wide receiver. I said last year we didn't. I was completely wrong. JJ agrees. We got to get that number 1 guy. I mean, when you look at the teams that are doing well with this system, with the hybrid version of this system, which is in Seattle, they had the number 2 offense in the league as far as points per play. And that's the big – I don't know if you've heard of points per play or not, JJ. I'm sure you have. That's the big gambling stat right now. That's what people are really gauging offenses on, and I think it's brilliant. To me, it's the equivalent to yards per carry for a running back. I don't care how many touchdowns he has. I don't care how many overall yards he has. I want to know how many he's getting per clip. Seattle's number 2. What's their wide receiver room look like, JJ? They've got Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, 2 number 1 receivers.
Quite good.
Miami, number 7 in PPP, right?
Miami's the one that they convinced me more than anything else. It's Miami. Yeah.
Yep. Jalen Waddle, number 1 receiver. Tyreek Hill, number 1 receiver. Cincinnati, number 9 in PPP. Jamar Chase. Minnesota, number 11 in PPP. Justin Jefferson. I mean, I've got to eat crow, dude. I was wrong. You got to have that number 1 receiver. You do. And if you can get 2 somehow, man, you're really off to the races because this still is a passing league. I know everybody loves to fall in love with the run, and I'm as old school as it gets, man. I'd be totally fine throwing 5 passes a game and just pounding the freaking rock. I'm boring like that, right? But when it comes to being realistic,
we kind of tried doing that year. We kind of tried doing that this year.
Yeah, well, like this last game, I still heard a couple people chirping, going, "We just need to run the ball more." I'm like, you can't average 2.8 yards a carry and continue to run the ball. You're going to run it 3 times a punt, run it 3 times a punt, but. Now, don't get me wrong. You go back to the Giants game, we should have kept running the freaking ball. Against Minnesota, we should have kept running the ball, right? And I do think that's on Rodgers for the most part. I think he is influencing Matt LaFleur and wanting to throw the ball over the yard. But moving on to tight end, like what Goose said, the only tight end I'm showing on the roster, you correct me if I'm wrong, JJ, for 2023 is Josiah DeGuara. Is that what you got too?
Let's see, Tyler Davis. Yeah. Nope, just DeGuara.
Yeah. So we literally have 1 tight end on the roster. If there's a place where you're going to see a lot of draft capital poured in this year to tight end, or to tight end, if there's a time, it's going to be this year. I mean, you got 1 guy on the roster. He's a 62.1. He's 11th highest on the roster. I think he's got the potential to be a good tight end when he's used. The only problem is when he's used in that H-back role, it's a lot of leak plays, things like that. If you need a tight end that's going to stretch the field a little bit or play that George Kittle role out there in San Francisco. And that's another thing, too, when people say, well, this doesn't look like Kyle Shanahan's offense. Well, Sean McVay's offense doesn't look like Kyle Shanahan's offense. I mean, you watch them, and I broke it down as far as personnel, and the Rams led the league in 11 personnel last year, right? And then you go to San Francisco's offense, and they led the league in 21 personnel, right? They ran 21 personnel as much as the Rams ran 11 personnel, meaning the Rams are in 3 wide receiver sets, and the 49ers are in, 2 running back, 1 tight end sets. When you look at it from that angle, the Packers definitely are playing more Sean McVay ball, right? Well,
for sure,
the Rams are struggling just as bad as the Packers are. You know what I'm saying? San Francisco has taken a dip back too offensively, but I'm definitely in the minority when I say I feel like people have caught on to the old version of this scheme. And but that I truly believe that after watching the tape, Seattle, Miami, Cincy, and Minnesota are doing things way different than the LA Rams, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, with that being said, though, tight end, how do you address tight end, man? What would you do? Would you go out and try to get a big free agent? Would you, would you try to use some draft capital on it, take one early? What do you think?
All right, so let me just push back for a second, because if you're going to push back on the alarm around cap hit, which I think is fine to do, I'm also going to do that on unrestricted free agents, because this is something that people freak out about every single offseason.
Yep.
I have never bought into it one time, and I'm always right when I'm not putting any energy into panicking about, well, this guy's not under contract. If the Packers like him and want him back, he's going to be under contract again. They will sign him to a new contract. They do that every year. The only exception is when you run into situations like Zadarius Smith, where he was a cap casualty. They decided, we want these guys, including Aaron Rodgers, including Devondre Campbell, we want them more than we want Zadarius Smith, and we have screwed up with our cap to the point where we can't keep those guys and Zadarius, so Z is gone. And they just made that decision. That's the only time where they don't, or you get a Devontae where he doesn't want to be back. I think maybe they could be in that position with Allen Lazard, just the way that they've handled his contract. I think that there could be some feelings from him of, you didn't pay me. I sat out and asked for a better contract, and you refused and said, no, I'm not worth that contract. All right, well, I'm finishing out this year where I'm beholden to you, and then sayonara, I'm going to go find someone who's going to pay me, the money and the respect that I think I deserve. So,
right.
Bring it back to tight end, though. DeGuara being the only guy under contract doesn't freak me out a ton. I think they will bring Tonyan back. I could go either way on that. I don't super care if he's back. I like him, but I'm not going to be panicked if he's gone. I have been waiting and expecting for the Packers to do something at tight end in the draft. This past year, I thought it made perfect sense to draft a tight end. There were some guys who I really thought were worth a third-round pick in this draft that they didn't go after. But since the draft was over and the Packers have been making moves, actually, or trying to make moves. They tried to make one before the draft even began in going after Darren Waller in the Davante Adams trade. And then we've heard reports that before the trade deadline, they were still trying to go get Darren Waller again. I don't know if that's just Goody really likes Darren Waller specifically, or if there's something else going on there in regard to the tight end room as a whole. But I don't know if Goody's going to keep trying to pursue Darren Waller specifically again in 2023, because he might. I'm a little bit surprised he was trying to mid-season this year.
Yeah.
But is that any kind of an indication that he's going to try and make a splash play at tight end with a different trade? He's been trying for a couple of years. He was trying to get David Njoku. He was trying to get Zach Ertz, and then Darren Waller. He really does like the really big name, really flashy free agent tight ends, partly because there's not a lot of good tight ends out there. And so when you can identify a tight end who is really good, yeah, their value is through the roof. And I think Goody really does want one of those guys. We saw him go out and get Jimmy Graham a few years ago. He really does covet one of those top tight ends. He doesn't, in my mind, seem to view any other tight end that he doesn't know is a proven commodity as being quite the same level of value. He's content to roll with Mercedes Lewis and Robert Tonyan year after year, which, love those guys, but they're not on the level of a Darren Waller or a Mark Andrews, and we know that. And he's spent third-round picks on tight end a few times. doesn't seem like he's super interested in sinking a ton of capital into getting a tight end unless it's one of those top guys that he already knows is proven, which makes sense because it's such a hit or miss. You look at all the tight ends who are drafted, most of them are downright terrible. And then basically every team in the league, save like 4 or 5 teams, they don't have any good tight ends. So
Yep.
I do understand that, but that's, what do I think he's going to do this year? I think he's going to keep trying to make a splash play. But outside of that, I'm not sure he's going to draft any of the, top tight end names out there. The couple of times he has spent a 3rd round pick on a tight end wasn't anybody that the draft community was banging the table for. Josiah Deguara and Jay Sternberger were nobody's first choices,
Right.
And he's looking kind of more for role players, it looks like.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about what Matt LaFleur said earlier this year when he said tight end is one of those positions it's so hard to find someone that you can just plug and play because they have to marry up with the run and the pass and all that. And you definitely got that in Big Dog. Then obviously Tunyon seems to be on the same page with Rodgers as much as anybody. With that being said, Bill Ryan in the chat says if Rodgers has another multiple interception game versus Dallas, he is done. Bakhtiari's knee and age have caught up with him. Draft Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame, baby Gronk.
I feel like Mayer.
Watch the game at noon. Hey, let me tell you something. I'm a big fan of Notre Dame, and I've been watching a lot of Mayer. And I don't know, man. I'm so boring when it comes to the draft, JJ. I'm the guy. I know everybody's saying, man, it'd be nice to get the top pick. To me, the only time the top pick is valuable or at its peak value for me is when you have a quarterback that this is a franchise quarterback or as close to knowing as possible. Other than that,
right.
I'm of the opinion, trade out of the 1st round, collect draft capital. I mean, the fact that you can literally drop the salary cap hit so much lower with the new structure of the CBA and how everybody's slotted. I mean, that's really what the Packers have done and why they're not in the cap hell that people are claiming they're actually in is all these picks. Now, the problem is, when you're picking after the 3rd round, or in Packers' case, the 3rd round and beyond, this is the kind of roster you end up with those late picks. I would like to see. I think in a perfect world, what I'm trying to say is 5 third to 4th round picks, and forget 1st, forget 2nd. I think you can really find some gems in there. Like Zach Tom. Zach Tom to me is one person that's giving me hope for this roster, especially if Bach retires. I think Zach Tom has proven he can play left tackle. And the fact that his salary cap is as low as it is, his cap hit, I mean, that could be absolutely huge because, again, my top tier of players, quarterback and left tackle on the offensive side of the ball. Defense, it's edge, right? Now, going back to your Za'Darius comment, we differ a little bit there. To me, the reason we didn't re-sign Za'Darius or restructure because he said he wanted to be here, they chose Preston Smith over Za'Darius. That's the two comparisons I make. Now, why did they do that? Did they think that Preston Smith was a better player than Za'Darius? I don't think so. I think that you had 2 factors with Za'Darius. His back injury, you don't know how bad that is. You don't know if it's something that's going to continue. I fully expected it to rear its ugly head during this season. It hasn't so far. I've been wrong about that. But the other thing is the fact that he wasn't even traveling with the team when he was injured. Like, there was a fracture there. He said he was treated different in the locker room, right?
For sure.
So that, to me, I feel like that's what came into play there. Now,
there was a way to bring him back, and that was to tack on a bunch of more years. And I think that with his back injury specifically, I don't even think you have to factor in the locker room stuff, which we all have a lot of questions about. The back injury specifically, and the fact that I think that they probably feel a little bit bitten by the David Bakhtiari extension. Like we paid him a ton of money and he immediately got hurt and hasn't really been able to play, since then, at the time they had to make the Za'Darius decision. They're looking at it and going, you know what, we're still trying to wait this out and see if the Bakhtiari extension was the right call.
Yeah.
And our only option here to bring back Za'Darius is to tack on a bunch more years, because we don't have the cap space to do just a short-term thing with him, any kind of a prove it. We really have to commit to him long-term, and we're just not willing to do that because we have too many questions about his back injury, and that's all before you factor in any locker room stuff.
Definitely. And let's move on to offensive line. During the Super Bowl run, JJ, You were a Packer fan. I don't know everyone's age. In 2010, did you follow the Packers pretty close?
I didn't follow football super close, but I definitely was a Packer fan.
Gotcha.
Definitely was super excited to see them in the Super Bowl. Still, top 5 memory of my entire lifetime is watching them win the Super Bowl that year.
Gotcha. The reason I bring it up is during that time when Aaron Rodgers and the Packers really took off from 2010 till 2017, roughly, right? Whatever it was. Who was the left tackle?
You're putting me on a spot, and
I did it on purpose.
I should know the answer, but I don't.
No, listen, I'm looking at it going, okay, I remember they drafted Brian Bulaga, but they moved him to right tackle, and then they got Bakhtiari late. And my point is, I've been more in the past to say dump the money into left tackle. Dump into left tackle is the most important position. But when they didn't do that is when they had this high-powered offense, this strong roster, all the things it took to make it to the NFC Championship. Granted, lay an egg against Seattle, but all of those times, right? So for me,
wasn't their left tackle out for the Super Bowl? Wasn't he hurt?
I'm pretty sure he got hurt there in the first game. And it wasn't Chad Clifton, I don't believe. But I can't remember who it was that was left tackle. But it doesn't really matter the details. That's just the point I wanted to make is I think that left tackle is becoming one of those positions, especially in this type of scheme. And this is what I was talking to Coach Hahn about. And Coach Hahn, don't get me wrong, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but he agreed left tackle is the most important position. But he said second most would be center, and that is in my second tier, right? Now, is Josh Myers the center of the future? He's going to have to be right now, right? But if Bakhtiari retires, I think we would be pleasantly surprised to see how much money's freed up. Now, if Bakhtiari is completely healthy, I'm cool with him coming back. That's great. That is that borderline top-tier position because I've got it kind of sinking down now into that second tier simply because we have been like Bakhtiari being somewhat healthy this year. When we do see him on the field, I don't come out and go, man, thank God he's out there. That made a huge difference. But when he goes out of the game and I see a rookie Zach Tom filling at left tackle and it's sufficient, to me, all the problems have come from the interior, for the most part, and us kind of pulling Royce Newman. But let's talk offensive line. On the 2023 roster, you've got David Bakhtiari, Josh Myers, Royce Newman, John Runyon, Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, Tenuta, I don't know who that is, and Sean Ryan. Okay, now Sean Ryan is actually the third highest paid player on that offensive line. But when you grade those out, Bakhtiari, 78.7, he's third on the list. I'm totally cool with him coming back, right? He's third as far as offensive players PFF grade. Josh Myers, 61.5, he's 13th. He's on a rookie contract. He's going to be our center regardless if we like him or not. Royce Newman grades out as the 21st best offensive player on the roster at 58.6. John Runyon, 59.4. He's 17th. Zach Tom, 68.7. He's 7th. Rasheed Walker, there was no grade. Tenuta, no grade. And Sean Ryan, no grade. Now, when you look at the offensive line, you build it from the tackles in, right? Obviously, Josh Myers is set. He's set at center. Bakhtiari at left tackle. Yash is going to be a unrestricted free agent. I seen somebody on Twitter the other day posted that he was a restricted free agent or they had some kind of tenure that they could put on him. Do you know anything about a tender there right off the top, Dave? If you don't, it's okay. Maybe check. But I know on Spotrac it's saying he's an unrestricted free agent, which makes me think there's no way that we can do that again. I know not with a free agency tender, but I wasn't sure if there was something else there, maybe a transition tag or something. I'm not sure. So anyway,
I'm not sure. I do think he'll be back though.
You do. So you think they'll re-sign him? If they can get him before he hits free agency to sign a deal, I mean that would be your right tackle of the future. You still got Bach at left tackle. You've got Zach Tom to play left tackle if Bach walks away, and you're kind of set up for the future is the way I see that. You run with Myers there at center. But this offensive line, I feel like was better this last game. Do you agree about that?
I think that they have slowly been getting better kind of, over the last like 4 or 5 games. And I think part of that has, yes, there's still been some shake up, but that you have had more consistency over the last like 4 or 5 games than you did either last year or for the beginning of this season. I think it's starting to pay some dividends that you're getting some guys to build some chemistry with who's to their left and their right. I think you are just seeing just some steady growth from the whole unit.
Gotcha. Yeah. And you, like I said, you've got 8 offensive linemen there. If they end up carrying 10, whatever the number is, then yeah, you go out and try to solidify. I think right guard is going to be the big thing if you don't bring back Elton Jenkins. And the reason I mentioned that with Elton Jenkins is because, I mean, he's going to try to get tackle money, and rightfully so, right? He's proven that he can play tackle. I do think this plays a little bit in Green Bay's favor, seeing that he's had a down year. But I think if I looked at it correctly, I don't want to say, yeah, okay. According to Spotrac, the calculated market value per year for Elton Jenkins is $14 million. Okay, you can make that work. You can. We
Right.
talked about how you can
Yeah.
restructure some things and bring him back. But going back to my original comment, it's why I mentioned it right offhand. Is it that important to pay someone who's not going to be playing left tackle that kind of money, right? I think a best case scenario would be Bach retires, frees up a ton of money. You re-sign Elton, you put him at left tackle, or maybe put him at left guard, put Zach Tom at left tackle, because I feel like Tom plays better at tackle than guard. But there's some options there. But are you bringing Elton back, though?
I think that this is going to be the big topic of the offseason is Elton Jenkins. You got some other franchise. I think Chicago really wants to get Elton Jenkins. I think there's going to be some a lot of consternation from folks until some sort of a deal gets done. And I do think that the big thing is going to come down to the Packers are going to want to pay him as a guard. He's going to want to get paid as a tackle. But I do think that there is a healthy chance that the Packers, in the end, go ahead and pony up whatever it takes because they value his versatility so much and they view him as a guy that you can stick at all 5 spots. And I don't think that they are remotely willing to let that walk away. Now, you could look at the level he's played at this year and say, well, how good actually is he? I think the Packers think he's really, really good. And I think that they are giving him, built in credibility for what he has done in the past, and just kind of putting the asterisk on this year saying, well, he's not fully healthy. I think that's how they're viewing him. I don't personally agree with that assessment, but that absolutely is how I read the tea leaves of how they view him. I think that he's going to be one of their top priorities. I think it's Rashawn Gary and then Elton Jenkins is going to be the top 2 biggest priorities after figuring out what the heck you're going to do with Aaron Rodgers and whether he's coming back or not. That's how I view it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I don't think that – I mean, I think that's very, very reasonable for sure. Again, I'm kind of looking at it from the angle of is it worth sinking a bunch of money into? And, going into this offseason, absolutely. I was the one screaming, I was pounding on the table, we got to extend Elton. But now I'm looking at him coming off the knee injury. And granted, you're trying to get that knee to function like it was before. I mean, you're basically that. I've always tried to understand what it's like for an ACL. I've never torn an ACL, broken a few bones, but I've never torn an ACL. And when you hear it's one thing for just, guys like you and I to tear an ACL. It's another thing for an athlete who's putting all that strain on it. And
right.
Pat McAfee mentioned on the McAfee show that the most difficult part about it is it doesn't feel like it's healthy, even though it is. And these players mentally are saying to the trainers, it feels like it's going to snap. Are you sure it's not going to snap? And they're like, I promise it's not going to snap. You've just it's got to become a cut. And I don't even know if I'm explaining that correct or well enough, but that just, I don't know, man. I think that we downplay that injury way too much because we've seen people like Adrian Peterson come back so quick, But yeah.
Well, and I'll say all off season long, I was pretty vocal and got a lot of flack for saying I don't freaking want Elton Jenkins at right tackle in 2022 because he's coming back compromised. I don't think he's our best. This is what I was saying all off season. I think I've absolutely been proven correct. I don't think that in 2022, the version of Elton we have coming off of his ACL is the best right tackle that we have. He also doesn't have experience really playing at right tackle beyond just a couple snaps. And I don't think it's what's best for him as a player. I wanted him inside, in a phone booth where we're asking less of his knee and we are asking less of him mentally and emotionally to be trusting that knee. Tackle is such an athletic position. I don't want him out there. I don't want him, either, getting up in his own head about, limited athletic ability and a lack of trust in his knee. I don't want him picking up any bad habits that are going to impact him for the future. And I don't think that he's the best option on the outside to be protecting Aaron Rodgers when he's not 100% healthy. He's not even a full year. Like I think today maybe he's like finally right around about a full year removed from his ACL tear. And it really, an ACL injury is a 2-year recovery process. You got about a year to get back on the field and then a second year to get back to the level of play that you were before the injury. That's kind of been borne out again and again. We see that everywhere. I think, a lot of people are kind of confused about the whole situation because you got, on the one hand, you got Odell Beckham, who came back from his ACL and, was kind of basically playing right back where he was right before the injury and then re-injured it. And then, on the other side, you got Bakhtiari, who missed basically 2 full years, almost, 18 months before he could even get back on the field. And people were questioning, has he played his last down of football? So, but the fact of the matter is, I never expected us to get the Elgton Jenkins that we had pre-injury back in 2022. I viewed that as a 2023 return. And I do think when it comes to the contract negotiations, I think it helps the Packers and their standing a bit that, number one, his level of play has been not quite where it was for this year. I'm expecting he'll get back. But also, number two, that they put him on the outside at right tackle, and it clearly wasn't working, and they had to put him inside. That gives you some leverage at contract time to say, look, we'd like to play you at tackle, but you couldn't hang at tackle this past year, and we feel a lot more comfortable with you at guard. And that's a position that he's going to, he and his agent are going to have to be trying to defend and saying, like, look, he's injured. He's trying to come back from that. And the Packers can say, well, gosh, you're asking me to take this risk that you're going to be back all the way, and we love you. But I think that this gives the Packers a better negotiating standpoint. One other thing I want to touch on is you were asking about Yosh Nijman and his, what the Packers options are there. He is a restricted free agent. And what that means is that the Packers, so Yosh can go out and negotiate a new deal with any other team, but the Packers have a right of first refusal and they can match whatever contract he negotiates with another team. And then he has to sign with them. Also, the Packers have the option of putting a tender, of any kind on Yosh. And I think that they will do that. I think that they,
absolutely.
He has proved his worth. I think you probably put, maybe a second round tender or something like that on him. I think that he, has demonstrated a level of value that you are willing to pay the tender amount to keep him. But also he's kind of in that, gray area where if he does walk, you are pleased with that, draft pick compensation for him. He's kind of in that perfect, middle zone where it's like, no matter which way it goes, we win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And man, with that being said, knowing that Yosh will be back, and I agree with you, I think he will. Oh, I hate to say it, man, but I'm saying let Elgton walk, man. I never thought I would say that, but I would. I would let Elgton walk. I'd play Yosh at right tackle. That's your right tackle of the future. If Bach comes back, great. He's left tackle. You put Tom at left guard. If Bach decides to retire, Zach Tom is your left tackle now because, in my opinion, he's proven he can hold up at left tackle. And I was really surprised with Yosh. And I want to say this. You said, you were screaming for Elgton to be interior. And I was one of those guys saying, no, we need him at right tackle. You were right. I was wrong, period. Now, because I was saying we don't know if Yosh can play right tackle. Like, I mean, if he can, great. Right. Yeah. And he's proven he can. Granted, it's not like it's, he's playing elite level or anything, but he's proven that he can do it. So with that being said, that's kind of how I see the offensive line, man.
Well, for me, for Elgton, I'll just say my stance on any player is I don't want them back for too much money.
Right.
So
right.
With Elgton, it does come down to how much you can sign him for. But the one thing that I think you can't overlook is how young Elgton is. This is a guy who the coaches really love and really trust. He's extremely intelligent. They really value that they can move him around to all these different spots in the offensive line. I do think fully healthy, He is the best offensive lineman. You got, once Bakhtiari is probably gone after this year, or maybe gone. We'll just say maybe gone.
Yeah.
I would really like to keep him at left guard, kind of long term moving forward. Zach Tom, to me, he can play center, he can play left tackle. I kind of want him at left tackle, kind of permanently. I'm not really interested in playing him on the right side at all. I don't think he's built for it. And I think that Elton is a much better guard than Zach Tom is. I think that you're, on the left side of the line, Zach Tom and then Elton Jenkins is the best combination you can have. And I do think, you were talking about the importance of shoring up that interior. I really think it is important. Guard is important, and I know that you can find kind of replacement level guard play, and we like John Runyon. I understand that, but I think that Elton Jenkins at left guard provides so much value to the overall offensive line, and you're having him next to the two most important guys, and having that brain in between whoever your left tackle is, hopefully Zach Tom, and Josh Myers at center. I think that is also really important. We have some questions about Josh Myers. Love him, but we have some questions about him. His play kind of is up and down at times. He makes a lot of mental mistakes. We have a lot of issues with snapping the ball. I think having a really high intelligence player in Elton Jenkins next to him is really going to be important for continuing to develop Josh long-term into the kind of guy that we can trust and hopefully turn him into a Corey Lindsley.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to take a parting shot here as we move on to defense, and I swear I did not. It just popped up in the chat, but I was going to say it before Mike hopped in the chat, and I'm going to throw it up here in a second. But I was going to say, with center being my second tier, I would like to see if you bring Elton back, play him at center.
Or Zach Tom, anyone, another guy you could play at center. But Elton,
could you imagine an offensive line where it's Zach Tom with that cheap of a contract at left tackle, Yash with that cheap of a contract? Granted, it's going to be a restricted tender, probably going to be a second round tender, I would imagine, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So put him at right tackle, and you put Elton right in the middle of all that, right at center. I don't know. That's pretty appealing to me. It's one thing that we haven't tried. I know he's filled in the past, but the reason it kind of triggered the thought in my mind there, like I said, it came to mind before Mike mentioned it. Mike said in the chat, I'm very concerned about Josh Myers at center. He just isn't consistent enough, at least not yet. And it's crazy because he's showing great pass set skills, right? But it's just in the run blocking that he's grading so low. Now, some would disagree with PFF's assessment of that, and that's cool. I respect that. But according to PFF, Josh Myers, 61.5. If you get Elton playing in the 80s there at center, man, that really changes things up. So now, when you said it about Elton, we cannot get off offensive line. This is hilarious.
It's so important, man.
For the right price, we completely agree there. The fair market assessment, according to Spotrac, is $14 million per year. Would you pay that much, or do you feel like what's the number that kind of just triggered? Is there a number that comes to mind?
So I'm looking right now at where is it? Here we go. So I'm looking at offensive lineman contracts. Let's see, for paying him as a left guard. So Quentin Nelson for the Colts is getting $20 million a year. Joel Bitonio for the Browns is getting 16. Joe Thuney for the Chiefs is getting 16. So if he's getting 14, that would put him at fourth overall in the league, just ahead of Laken Tomlinson for the Jets, who's making just a penny below 14 mil, basically. I think as a left guard, obviously it's pricey, but if there is a left guard in the league that I feel is worth paying that way, I think that Elton makes a lot of sense. And if you compare that to center, he would be the highest paid center. So Jason Kelce is making 14 mil for the Eagles. And if Elton's wanting to be paid as a tackle, he would be kind of a lower paid tackle. You're going to find him all the way down about 20 spots down. He'd be about the 18th highest paid tackle in the league, in between Deion Dawkins for the Bills and Joseph Noteboom for the Rams. And I just think that, you have to look at him through the lens that the Packers view him, which is that he is one of those premier guys. I think that the Packers front office, and this is not me saying I agree with them, but I think the Packers front office would view that as a steal, that, wow, we're getting this guy that we think is better than all these guys for that kind of money. If they could get him for 14 mil, I think that they would view that as a steal. And I would just say, the way they will structure his contract, he's not going to be 14 mil for the first couple of years. It's going to go up as the years go on, as the cap goes up. This is how they always do their contracts. I think 14 mil for Elgton Jenkins probably is okay. If you actually believe that his level of play is still being impacted by his ACL and that he's going to get back up into like the 80s, I think 14 mil is actually something you should pull the trigger on. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I think I agree, especially after hearing the other numbers. But he's going to get a chance to test free agency, right? I mean, there's no restriction. There's nothing. He gets to go out and hit the market openly. So am I right in that? So,
I believe you. I think he is an unrestricted free agent.
That's the case. He's going for tackle money. He's going for Bakhtiari money, Now, granted, he does have the injury to deal with. But if the Packers are having to compete against other people in the open market, I mean, they missed their window to re-sign him. Granted, right now, just based off of the PFF and how the injury is gone, the rehab is gone, you would think they made the right decision, but it still hurts, because you come to like Elgton. He's a solid offensive lineman. I just don't know, man. If he gets to test the market, I think there's going to be a team that's going to overpay for him. I mean, the overpaying across the league right now is amazing. That's what's really funny to me is when you look at how the roster breaks down. And I'm going to ask you this real quick, JJ. We're at the 1 hour and 15-minute mark. Do you want to keep going with defense, or do you want to save it for next Saturday? What would you like to do?
I'm having a blast. Let's do it.
All right, cool. Let's roll with it. So, offensive line, that's kind of how it shakes out. Now, let's wrap up offense real quick. As far as needs and minimums, a bare minimum of one more receiver and 3 tight ends is what you need to add to this roster according to the way it sits right now. So that's just something to think about when you're looking at draft information, stuff like that, as far as free agents coming up in the open market, stuff like that. For the listeners out there, might want to keep an eye on that. So, again, 1 wide receiver, 3 tight ends is what I'm showing. Let's move on to defense. Let's start with the defensive line. What I mean by defensive line, guys, I'm not talking about edge defenders. We're talking about big body defensive line that are going to play, one of the 3 spots in a 34 front, okay? Meaning typically they're 285 plus, most of the time over 300-pounders. On the roster right now, we've got coming back 4 defensive linemen. And, JJ, if I'm off on my information, you just cut me off and correct it. Defensive line, you've got Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, and Jonathan Ford, okay? According to PFF, Kenny Clark, 64.3. He's the 9th highest graded player on defense for the Packers. Devontae Wyatt, 69.3. Think about that. And I know it's a much smaller sample size as far as snaps, JJ, but Devontae Wyatt has scored 5 points higher, according to PFF. He's performed 5 points higher than Kenny Clark this year. That's pretty wild. I want to see him get more snaps, man. Definitely. TJ Slayton, a 52.0. He's 23rd at the bottom of the heap. Man, he just has not panned out so far. And then Jonathan Ford, there's no grade to the best of my knowledge. Now, I think there's got to be a minimum of 5 at that position, right? As far as big body defensive line that can play the 2 interior spots from the 4 technique in your nickel defense, as well as any of those 3 spots in the 34 front. Now, don't get me wrong. I know, Devontae Wyatt, it's typically a 3 technique and not a nose. However, in a pinch, you want people to be able to play those different spots. But as far as defensive line, Kenny Clark is not worth the money this year. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, that's a fair.
Yeah. So with that being said, you got those 4 guys coming back. I feel like there's a minimum of 1 open slot. How would you approach this? I mean, I think the rest of the way here with the Packers all but being eliminated from the playoffs, and I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, we're getting closer to that point where we're going, okay, look, playoffs are really, really looking too much of a stretch. I would like to see Devontae Wyatt get a lot more playing time. But what do you think about defensive line?
The Packers need to put their money where their mouth is. If they're a draft and develop team and the rest of the games from here on out are meaningless, Devontae Wyatt needs to get all the reps. He should be out there for as many reps as his body can handle, because who cares if he makes mistakes and loses you the game? The reps are important. Yes, we still want to win games from here on out, but you're not costing yourself, any kind of impact on the postseason if Devontae Wyatt is screwing up. He's your first round pick. This is a guy. I wanted Devontae Wyatt with our pick at 22. He was one of my biggest first round draft crushes. I love Devontae Wyatt. I think I had him right around number 10 on my draft board. That he was like one of the right around the 10th best player in this draft class. I really liked him. I was disappointed that we took Quay Walker at 22, only because I thought that meant we were going to miss out on Devontae Wyatt. And then getting him at 28, I was ecstatic. Give him all the reps. If draft and develop is actually, what you believe in, it's time to develop.
Yep.
Devontae Wyatt and TJ Slayton need as many reps as you can give them. They're not going to cut Kenny Clark or, do anything with him. He's going to keep playing out his contract the way he is. You got 4 guys on the roster. Numbers from the past would say that we're probably going to carry about 6 into next year. I'm not sure that your top 3 guys are quite enough. I think you want somebody about like a Dean Lowry back, whether that's somebody out in free agency, maybe bring back Jaron Reed, which maybe is what they end up doing there. And then you're going to pick up another, John Ford level guy, probably in the mad scramble after the draft, and you're picking up these undrafted free agents. That's probably where you're going to get another guy, about that level. Jack Heflin. I think Jack Heflin's on our practice squad. Actually, he's probably is going to be one of those guys.
Ooh, yeah.
I think that's probably it. I don't think that they're going to make any other big plays there because they got 2 first-round picks on that interior defensive line. You don't allocate any more, top resources in that. You also got a 5th-round pick in TJ Slayton. Is he 4th or 5th? He's right around 4th or 5th. I think that those 3 are, your big capital guys along there. And then listen, if you got 3 guys that you spent 2 first-round picks and a 4th or 5th-round pick, that's enough for your interior. You don't need to add any other, you just need to get the production that you need out of those guys. And I think you will if you're giving Devontae Wyatt those reps for the rest of the season. So they need to do that. I love Dean Lowry. I think Jaron Reed is doing a good job, but it's time for Devontae Wyatt to get a lot of playing time from here on out for the rest of the season. Sorry Absolutely. To Dean and Jaron, but Devontae Wyatt is passing you because it's time for him to learn.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And when you look at Kenny Clark, let's kind of backtrack to Kenny Clark here. He's $23.9 million against the cap next year. Guys, 64.3 PFF grade. I mean, you want to know why the run defense is struggling? It's because you've got that much money tied up in one player and he's not performing. That's not an indictment on Kenny Clark. I'm not saying they should cut Kenny Clark. I love everything Kenny Clark represents. I think he's a leader on this defense. Some people could say it's scheme. I don't personally believe that. When I watch the tape, I don't find myself going, they're putting a spot to fail here. I find myself going, when do you shed a block? Like, when do I ever see you shed a block? So with Kenny Clark, 23.9 against the cap, there's a 20.8 dead cap hit, okay? So if you cut Kenny, you're only freeing up $3 million. So he's on the roster for 2023. Yeah. Now, he's got a base salary, according to Spotrac, of $13 million, a signing bonus of $5 million, roster bonus of $2.5 million. Some of that can be converted. And when we talked about originally the restructure potential of the Packers being 49 million in simple restructure and then maximum restructure of 71.7. Let's don't even look at the maximum. Let's kind of peek over there to the simple restructure. This is one of those contracts that you could do. You could convert some of that salary to signing bonus or to signing bonus, and you could push that out a touch and free up some of that cap if indeed you want to keep Kenny on the roster. Now, I'm not talking about pushing a crazy amount of money out. We're talking about $2 million here, $2 million there, right? Like Adrian Amos is a good example, guys. When we talk about, and we're going to get to the safeties in a second, but when we talk about this current roster and how it lays out, I mean, Adrian Amos has underperformed, dramatically. I think everybody would agree with that. Both he and Savage have just been horrendous this year as far as PFF grades are concerned. I see it on tape as well. Amos, not as much as Savage, but it is what it is. Adrian Amos next year on the cap is $7.9 million against the cap next year, and he's not even on the roster. So when we made this move this year to reset and bring everybody back the way that we did, Adrian Amos was one of those guys. And, man, if we knew he was going to perform the way he did, JJ, I think we agree he wouldn't be on this roster, right? Like, there would have been something done different. Let's get to safety in a minute. As far as defensive line, I completely agree with you. Those pieces are in place because of the contract. Clark's not going anywhere. Get Devontae Wyatt more reps. I think you've got to add 2 more bodies, although there's just one minimum, in my opinion. But if you add another solid defensive line to try to shore up that run defense, I think that would help this defense tremendously. Is there anything else you want to add to the defensive line room?
The only thing I'll just say is that with Kenny Clark's contract, I think they are going to do the max restructure. Kenny Clark and the way they set up his contract in the beginning, he's a guy that they really love, that they do still believe in for the long run. Packers have always been way higher on Kenny Clark than I ever have, basically every single year of his career. But there's nobody on this roster that they like freeing up cap space from more than Kenny Clark. Every single year, they like to take basically his whole base salary and turn it into signing bonus. I think they're going to continue to do that. So you're going to free up a lot of money there. And I am ready to talk about safety, but I might need to do some shots first because the safety position is a hard one to talk about on this roster.
It's tough, man. It's tough. It is. Mike in the chat says Wyatt needs to play more now. He should be basically out there as much as he can physically, as much as he can take physically. I completely agree. I know JJ does as well. Mike also says in the chat, all the young guys should be playing all the time moving forward. Guys like Watkins should not play unless absolutely necessary. This game this week, JJ, is where I kind of draw a line in the sand. If somehow you beat Dallas, and I don't expect it to happen personally.
This is your last chance. Yeah.
Yeah. If they somehow upset Dallas, then you kind of keep moving forward, try to put the best product on the field. And now you lose this game. Now you got to start looking at, okay, look, and I know people in the chat, I know people on Twitter are going, cut Rodgers, get rid of you guys. You've got to understand it's not an option to cut or trade Rodgers. You've got to remove that from the equation. The cap hit he is protected in that sense. It's essentially a no trade clause. It might as well be with the cap hit. Now, could he retire? Yes. Do I think the Packers would be better if he retired? No, but I respect people's opinion that think they would. I can understand why you would feel that way, right? So we got to kind of, the next comment here with Mike says, including Love. Now, here's what I will say. If they lose to Dallas, JJ, you got to draw a line in the sand. If I'm Goody, I'm going to Rodgers. I'm saying, listen, dude, we tried. And you can't do this by yourself. We screwed up. I would take the complete fall with Rodgers and say, we know the thumb isn't healthy. We've seen you underthrow players the last 3 weeks. Let's put you on IR. Let's put Love in. Let's see what we got with this roster, and let's reset for next year. You're protected. You're not a lame duck quarterback. You got what you wanted. You can't trade you. You're going to be back next year if indeed you want to come back. But there's no sense in putting your thumb through it. Let's get surgery, whatever you need, and let's move forward with Love. You get an assessment of Love. If you find out that, hey, look, Love is the guy, which I honestly don't think that game time is going to tell them that. I think they already know. And Ryan kind of alluded to it on Twitter that, maybe they already know whether he is or isn't the guy. If he is the guy, forget that 5th-year option. Extend that dude. Extend that dude to a contract. You can play with the money a lot easier in that regard rather than a 5th-year option being 100% guaranteed. It might as well be a franchise tag. That's the way I see that. So, yeah, Mike, good stuff, man. And then Mike in the chat says, great discussion, fellas. I respect both your opinions very much. This is great content. We appreciate the love, Mike. Man. Yeah. And anytime, it's so hard on Twitter, JJ, to not come across as an asinine, what, but I love having these conversations, but it's like people go 0 to 100 like that. And you're coming out of a conversation where it went to 110 and you're stepping into a new conversation and you're still at 110 and they're at 10 mile an hour. And it's like, it's hard to have every conversation we have roster wise, people jump into that conversation and make it about Rodgers. And I'm like, we weren't even talking about Rodgers. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, Mike, thank you though. We appreciate it. Let's move on to Edge. Edge, you got Preston Smith as the highest cap hit right now, graded out as a 64.2. Horrible. I mean, that's really bad. Rashawn Gary obviously just went to injured reserve, 82.9. I think we all agree Rashawn Gary, although the injury is going to make things awkward, get him locked up. He's the heart and soul of the defense. That's the guy you want to build around. Again, that's a top-tier position for me is edge. So you definitely want to bring him back. And then next on the list is Jonathan Garvin, 42.7. I know it's a small amount of snaps, but And then Enigbar, though, man, 63.3, showing a little bit of promise. I think he's going to be ready to step in 2 to 3 years when Preston Smith is done. When I say done, not that Preston will necessarily retire, but the way the contract is structured, we'll be able to get out of that in 2 years. And essentially, Devondre Campbell, and Russell Douglas were 2-year deals as far as minimizing cap hit, wanting to get away from them in the future. So what do you think about the edge room, JJ?
Yeah, well, I'll just say Enibar is another guy I was thrilled to get because I had him as a second-round pick. So we got him at the back of the 5th. I was crushed, that we hadn't drafted him, and I thought that like at every round that ticked by, I was like, he's sitting there. He's a second-round pick in my eyes. What are we doing?
Same.
And then we even toward the back of the 5th round, we even traded down. I was like, well, that's it. They're officially not going to take this guy. They still got him. I was overjoyed. I did view him as a little bit of a developmental guy. I didn't like anything he did in run support in college. That's something we've seen him start to develop his rookie year with the Packers here. And the fact that he is showing improvement there and has gotten so much better there in run support gives me all the confidence in the world in him moving forward and his development. I'm thrilled that we have him. I really like our top 3. I expected heavy regression from Preston this year. Goody came out a year or 2 years ago and kind of addressed he's like, listen, something I have noticed with Preston over the course of his whole career is he kind of has good year, bad year, good year, bad year, and I can't explain it, but that's what he always does. And so you're looking at it, you're like, well, I guess that means 2022 is a regression year. Sure enough, it was. I don't know why, but Goody knows that's the thing. And it factored heavily into their decision making about bringing him back and giving him the contract that they did give him in 2021 for that season. And I think you're looking at him overall. I think he's gonna be here for another probably 3-4 years. I really think that unless he just really the bottom falls out. But you said he's at a 62. It's obviously not where you want him to be, but that's not bottom fallout to the level that you're trying to move on from him. And his cap hit really is not terrible moving forward. By the time you're at like 2024, 2025, he's about 15 mil a year, which is about probably going to be what we kind of think of as 10, 11 million right now, which is actually what he's costing us right now. It's costing us 11 and a half. By the time you're in 2025 and he's costing us 15 and a half, it's going to be about the same equivalent in 2025 NFL money as what that 11 and a half is, right now. I think, barring something going on with his health, he'll be 34 years old in 2026 by the time this contract expires. I think, his health is going to be the biggest determining factor. I think that they would like to keep him around for a while. Rashawn obviously is going to be the number one priority this offseason is figuring out a long-term deal with Rashawn. I think he's earned it. Definitely there were things going on, at leading up to his injury where you had some questions about some of his level of play. I think particularly in run support and trying to seal off the edge, he wasn't doing quite what you want, but no question, he's one of the best young pass rushers in the NFL. He should be your number one priority is wrapping him up. And I'll even say I care more about what they do with Rashawn than I do about Aaron Rodgers, because Rashawn, he's like the TJ Watt of the Packers. He's the guy that you got to build that defense around. He is everything that they were hoping he would be when they spent that number 12 draft pick on him. You got to do whatever it takes to keep him, and they will. And even just leaving out how good he is on the field, you look at what kind of a locker room presence he is and the leadership he provides, his incredible loyalty and work ethic. I have zero concern. He is going to be here long term. He's going to be, I think, barring an explosive emergence of Jordan Love, I think the second Rodgers is out the door, Rashawn Gary is the face of your franchise, for the next few years going forward. And I don't see anybody else who, really is poised to kind of take that mantle from him other than potentially Jordan Love, or if you have a different quarterback post Rodgers. And we do, before we wrap up, we do have to have a conversation at some point talking about the future of the quarterback thing and talking about, you made some comments about your thoughts on first round draft picks, and I did want to have a quick chat about that before we wrap up, but I recognize we're still on edge. I like our top three guys. Garvin, I kind of could take or leave. Another guy that we have in the building though is Ladarius Hamilton, who I would kind of
Be a
like to
futures
see
contract,
more
right?
of. Yeah,
Yep.
I think he's still on the books for us next year. I don't think he's a free agent. I don't see him anywhere on the list here. Ladarius is a guy that I really do actually like, and have more confidence in him than I do in like Garvin or Tipa. I think Ladarius has something there, and I was surprised that he did not make the 53 this year. I really was expecting him to be that final guy.
Yeah, and it kind of shows you the game within the game, right? And maybe Goody looking at it like Garvin has seen more playing time than these guys. If we try to put him to the practice squad, he may get scooped up as opposed to someone who's very unproven. And now what do you got?
Right.
You got him sitting on the practice squad ready to step into a futures contract, minimum contract for next year. There's a lot of things, man. That practice squad and the rule change there has really played in to how everything unfolds. We're going to move on from edge. Before we do, though, you mentioned about Preston Smith. I just want to bring the numbers up to kind of explain to the listeners what you were talking about. Preston Smith, $13 million on the cap this year, a dead cap of 9.7. So you can only free up like $3.3 million if you cut him for 2023, right? Well, in 2024, Preston Smith, $14.8 million. The cap penalty drops down to $7.3 million. Okay, and why do I mention that? Because you got a $5.7 million salary there, as well as a 2.4 signing bonus, 6.2 roster bonus. So it just kind of show you he's going to be on the roster in 2023. 2024 is when they might potentially could move on from him. But again, he has a great year next year for that cap hit. If he seems like he's going to carry that over to 2024, keep him on the roster. So good stuff there. Let's move on to inside linebacker. I'm showing 4 on the roster. That's Devondre Campbell. He graded out as a 76.7 so far, which is the 4th best defender on the roster. You've got Quay Walker, a 50.4, who 25th on defense as far as PFF ranking. Isaiah McDuffie, 68.4. He's 7th. This is what I was talking about a few weeks ago, JJ. I said on the pod, I don't know if you heard it or not, but I said I would like to see McDuffie get some reps over Quay Walker. I really would, just because let's let Quay step back a minute and kind of watch from the sideline. Okay, let me get my feet, kind of under me here. And then what did they do the next week, JJ? They gave him the green dot duties. I was way off. But they've also got Tariq Carpenter listed as a linebacker on the site that I use. I've got, safety question mark beside him. He could be considered a safety. I don't know. Obviously, he's more one of those hybrid players, but, call it what you want. If you consider him an inside linebacker, then you've got 4 on the roster in 2024. If you consider him a safety, you only got 3. But Campbell, you're good. Quay Walker's the linebacker of the future. Obviously, you got McDuffie coming back, who's going to be a service. I think he's still leading in PFF grade as far as special teams, so he's a special teams ace there. That might be another reason why they lean on Quay so much his rookie year. But are you happy with the inside linebackers, or do you want to see a change there?
I do want to see a change, and that's I want a new inside linebackers coach. I've never liked Kirk Olivadotti since his first year with the team. I don't get him. But as for the players, I think this is fine. I would be interested in seeing them bring back Eric Wilson. Obviously, I want to see him continue to play the rest of the year. With Devondre Campbell, having some health concerns and missing a little bit of time here and there. I think he's inactive for this Dallas game. Is that correct? Do you recall? I know he
I believe so. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So I that's a good opportunity for McDuffie, who you like, to get some more playing time. Get Eric Wilson out there. I couldn't go quite as far as benching Quay Walker for any amount of time. He's a rookie. You knew he was going to have some struggles this year, and I think that he has been playing better and better as the season goes on.
His last 2 games, right? His last 2 games were pretty solid.
And I want to continue to see him get every single rep he can, especially since, we're looking at this and saying that the rest of the games probably are pretty meaningless. Although, interestingly, the weird thing is with the way the rest of the NFL is stacked up with their wins and losses, a loss to Dallas this week doesn't impact things as much as you would think in terms of their playoff chances. The Packers still have about a 16% chance of making the playoffs. And with the rest of the NFC continuing to suck, we just had the Atlanta Falcons just lost to the 2-win Carolina Panthers on Thursday. And I was kind of torn when I saw that happen because, I was looking at it and I was saying, well, that puts us ahead of the Panthers in the draft order. So that's kind of, maybe a silver lining there. But if they lose against Dallas, they still have close to a 10% chance of making the playoffs. It's if they pick up 2 more losses that kind of solidifies, the fate of the season. If they get 2 more losses, they actually have higher odds of getting the number 1 overall pick than they do of making the playoffs at that point mathematically. But that also assumes that the teams you're expecting to win, because if we continue to have, this NFL or NFC parody of suckiness where no team wants to pull ahead at all, you might still be in a similar situation in 2 weeks where you're just in this purgatory of like, well, we still got about a 10% chance of making the playoffs. Maybe we don't put Aaron on IR because we want to keep, hope that he starts playing better and we sneak into the playoffs and get hot at the right time. You're in that sort of purgatory that I described us as being after the Buffalo game where, we lost to the Bills by more points than most teams are losing to them, but it felt like a better performance. And so, it's this kind of poor timing with the NFL trade deadline where, if they had turned in like a Detroit Lions performance like they had, that they had last week against the Bills 2 weeks ago, I think Goody is probably more looking at that with some certainty of like, this team isn't going to do anything. And I do want to, get some value out of guys like Aaron Jones. I could probably get a 1st-round pick in a trade for him. But he just had absolutely, there's no clarity because the Packers looked like they might be a lot better against the Bills. And then, the very next week they get, essentially blown out by the worst team in the NFL. And you're looking at that and saying, man, if I had known that a week ago, there's some guys who wouldn't be here today because I could get more for them than what we're getting out of them. So I don't know. But it will be interesting. And, like I said, I want Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt to get all the playing time that they can. And, love Devondre Campbell, but I'm kind of glad if he misses some time this week because I would like to see those young guys out there. I don't know what we have in Tariq Carpenter. I was higher on him preseason than I am right now. He's basically been a non-factor so far this year. But Quay Walker and Isaiah McDuffie getting some time out there. I think Chris Barnes is probably going to be playing as well. Chris Barnes is a unrestricted free agent at the end of this year.
Right.
I think the Packers would probably like to bring him back, but I don't think they care a ton. And with Isaiah McDuffie being a guy who kind of shows you some flashes occasionally that make you think that maybe he really could be a stud long term. I just, for this Dallas game, I would not like to see Chris Barnes out there very much because I would like to see Quay and McDuffie out there getting all those reps, getting a chance to work together, and really see what we have in McDuffie for next year. In addition to getting Quay all that valuable playing time.
Absolutely. And that's what's so cool about having these conversations. I'm sure the listeners agree, but for me personally, when we're talking about this stuff, I'm immediately making notes too on my pad here. I'm going, all right, Dallas, really want to keep an eye on Devontae Wyatt, really want to keep an eye on McDuffie. Those are things you want to look for and kind of see how they step up to the occasion there. All right, let's move on to corner. Corner, you got Jair Alexander, 76.9. He's 3rd on the defensive side of the ball as far as PFF. Rasul Douglas, 67.9. He's 8th. And then you got Stokes, 53.7. Oh, man, 22nd, according to PFF on our defense. And then Shamar Jean-Charles, 62.2. He's 14th on defense. Obviously, Stokes is the big black eye there. I know he's got the injury issue, and hopefully everything's good there long term. Whether someone's underperforming or not, you never want to see a player get hurt, especially when it's one that's scary like that. And I hope he turns it around. I do, man, because that's a 1st-round pick. That's a lot of faith in a guy, but he's definitely underperformed this year. The thing I've struggled with the most watching him this year, JJ, is in man coverage. He just looks lost in man. And with his skill set, you would think that's something he would thrive at. It's just, I don't know. It's definitely, it's not athleticism. It's awareness more than it's athleticism, in my opinion, or lack thereof. So that
Yeah.
being said, you've got 4 coming back on the roster, not including the futures, not including the practice squad players, but you've got 1 spot there open minimum with that fifth spot there. Alexander's going to be back. Douglas is going to be back. Stokes is obviously going to be back. John Charles is going to be back. Is there any reason to spend any extra money in the cornerback room? I know they've underperformed based off what we were expecting coming in this year, but how would you approach the cornerback room?
Yeah, I don't know that you make any moves, any kind of big moves there. I think you got your big 3 right there, and the biggest question that I really have is how do you use them going forward? Because I think that they really were misused this year. A big conversation that we had preseason was who do you put in the slot? Because you kind of got 3 outside, 3 boundary corners here in your top 3 guys, and you don't need 3 boundary corners. And there was, I didn't really have an answer. I'll just say. So I'm not trying to, say, oh, I was right and everybody else was wrong. I think everybody else was wrong, and I just said I don't know. So there was a big conglomerate of people who were saying you got to put Jair in the slot because Stokes and Rasul can't do it. And I think that that has been kind of borne out that like Douglas is a horrible slot corner. I think he's absolutely like bottom of the barrel terrible as a slot corner. Like his skills are not being utilized at all. And I think you get better production out of Keyshawn Nixon in the slot than you do Rasul Douglas. I kind of want to see Douglas exclusively on the boundary where he does thrive, where we have seen him be good in the past. Yep. That is where you can maximize what he does well. It feels like taking Aaron Rodgers and having him play tight end. Like, what are you doing? He's got, incredible skills as a quarterback, and he's useless as a tight end. I feel like that's what we're doing with Rasul. And do you want to squander Jair's talents in the slot? Not really, but I'm not really sure. This was the big thing when we paid all this to bring Rasul back. And you like Rasul, but it was a little bit weird that you brought in a third highly paid boundary corner. Other teams really don't do that. And we kind of have a little bit of a deficit of guys who can play in the slot. Now, are we going to see Darnell Savage play at the slot this week with the addition of Jonathan Abram at safety? That'll be interesting to see. The Darnell Savage obviously has been one of the hottest topics of this entire regular season, and even the off season and the end of last season. What the heck do you do with Darnell Savage? Does he have anything left in the tank at all? Joe Barry, says, well, I think he'd be an incredible slot corner. Okay, man, put your money where your mouth is, because he's a terrible safety and we have a terrible slot corner. So, you don't like to see injury to Stokes, but the one positive that comes out of it is you're taking away all excuses from Joe Barry and Matt LaFleur in terms of how you restructure this secondary. And I'm just saying, man, I don't know that I want to bring back Jair, Stokes, and Douglas all next year. It's nice to have the depth at boundary corner for sure, but we're not paying these guys as though one of them is depth. We're paying 3 starters. So there is definitely a part of me that would be looking to maybe move one of these guys in the offseason, just because you're kind of squandering some resources, in my opinion, that you got 3 guys and 2 spots for him, and you're kind of unwilling to play Jair in the slot, and he's kind of the only guy who can do it. I just don't think that what we're paying Rasul for the production we're getting out of him in the slot is a responsible managing and stewardship of the resources you have. I think you need to find some way to maximize the strength of all 3 of these guys. But the questions you have about Stokes also leaves you feeling a little with your hands tied behind your back, because, do you want to trust him as your boundary CB2? I think that Rasul is a better boundary right now than Stokes is. So, do you move Rasul and roll with Stokes? That there's an argument to be made in favor of that, but I think that there's every danger that you could find yourself with the situation you have with Darnell Savage right now with Stokes in a year or two, where you're just like, man, we've given him all this time, and yeah, he shows flashes occasionally, but he can't put it all together with any kind of consistency. So I think we have a little more clarity now than we did during the offseason about the cornerback room, but not necessarily still any clear and obvious path forward to sorting this out. All I know is that right now, I don't think it's working. And the secondary secondary has been a problem, and I think that this Stokes injury, the huge negative is that you're not giving Stokes any more time to keep getting this playing time and continue to develop, but the benefit is you're removing all excuses from Joe Barry and Matt LaFleur. Put your money where your mouth is. Rearrange this defense, the way that your lips are telling us it would work best. Put Darnell in the slot. Put Rasul on the boundary. That's obviously the path forward. Are they going to do it? Who knows?
What's amazing too is how Adrian Amos has played more free safety than strong safety this year, and vice versa. But here's how I see that whole situation. First of all, what you said with Rasul playing boundary, I completely agree. I think you put him on the boundary. They should have done it weeks ago because Stokes has played that bad. I would like to see him play boundary. This week we're kind of forced into it with the Stokes injury. Now, as far as getting rid of, and I'm not saying that's exactly what you were saying, as far as if we tried to move on from Rasul Douglas in 2023, I personally don't want to see that happen. 6.7 against the cap next year with a cap penalty of 3.5. So you could free up $3 million in cap. I would much rather have Rasul playing. But what the big mistake that I keep seeing with this Packers front office, JJ, is they won't accept the fact that maybe they missed on a first-round pick. Maybe Stokes isn't as good as they thought he was. Put Rasul on the boundary where he's strong, right? Now, if you put Savage in the slot like we're talking about, his coverage grade isn't great, right? However, his run tackling is freaking horrible. You put him at the slot, you're really going to limit how many times you see him, come up in the run fit. Especially the fact that when they go to a heavy set, they've got that strong safety rolled into the box. I showed like a 34 front on Chalk Talk this week where Savage is right there in the box and Amos is playing deep. I know there's reasons they do that. But this week, Alexander on the boundary, Douglas on the boundary, put Savage in the slot, play Rudy Ford at safety, and you literally two birds with one stone. Savage is on the roster next year, guys. There's no getting around it, right? You could trade him, but you still take the cap hit. However, we're going to get to safety in a second. You're two birds with one stone. You get to see, can Savage play the slot this week if they do this? And you also get to see, can Rudy Ford handle an entire game at safety? So, again, Devontae Wyatt, keep your eye on him. O.J. McDuffie, or Isaiah McDuffie, I should say. I always go back to the 90s. Isaiah McDuffie, you get to see what you got there. And then, obviously, you can see, can Stokes play the slot? And you can see, can Rudy Ford play safety? I don't think that Abram is going to be ready in that short amount of time. Not that he won't get some snaps, but, you see these safeties still making mistakes in this Joe Barry defense, mental mistakes. How in the world is a guy going to come in and pick it up immediately? I just don't see it. So let's we're at the –
hang on. One correction. If they trade Darnell Savage, there's zero cap hit.
Really?
There's no dead money at all. His contract is fully guaranteed, but it travels with him. You have dead cap hit if you have prorated bonuses, and all of his prorated bonuses, in the form of the signing bonus he got with his rookie contract, those have all been paid out. He has zero dead cap hit if we trade him. If we don't trade him, if we cut him, yes, we do have the cap hit. If we trade him, it all travels with him.
Gotcha. So check that out. So that's the other thing too, though. What team is going to look at that tape and say, "Yeah, we'll take on almost $8 million"? It's kind of yin and yang there. But that's a great point. I'm glad you I see it here now. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because Ryan mentioned that a couple weeks ago as well. Man, I don't see a team that's going to do it unless it's just going to be, hey, give us a 6th-round pick and you get a 1st-round talent, but it gets this off our books. Yeah. It's going to be interesting, though. See how it comes into play for sure.
I will say, going back to Stokes for a second, and talking about, you have the you're talking about the sunk cost fallacy with the first round pick, and that they won't admit when they make mistakes. I'll just say I have not seen anything from Stokes yet to have me alarmed. He's still only a second year player, and when I look at football and roster construction and drafting and all that, I mean, right there in my top 10 commandments, maybe at like number 2 or 3 is give give your rookies 3 years before you figure out what you have in them, because you got. If we had evaluated Darnell Savage in like year 2, we would have said absolutely bona fide, he's a hit, and now that we're in year 4, we kind of know what we have in him. And it's like, yeah, he's not great. And that's unfortunate. And you got other guys. I mean, listen, I swear halfway through the 2021 season, I still had idiots arguing with me on Twitter about how Rashawn Gary was a freaking bust. I'm not even kidding. Halfway through the year, there was a guy, I finally blocked him because I was so sick of every single game, 4 or 5 times a game. He'd be like, oh, look at what our first round bust did, on that rep. And listen, by the end of the year, everybody had finally shut up. You have to give him a full 3 years. So I'm 0% concerned about Stokes right now, because halfway through his second year in the NFL, you don't know jack about whether he's a hit or not. He's got issues in his game right now for sure, and yeah, that affects your decisions about playing time for right now if you're trying to make it into the playoffs. But long term, we are only halfway through the minimum amount of time to evaluate whether he's a hit or not. And way too often you get guys who you proclaim a hit too early or proclaim a bust too early. You got to give them a full 3 years. And there's other positions, some positions like tight end where it's even more important than others that you wait that full 3 years. I think, and quarterback as well is one where, quarterback maybe is a little bit less so, where you kind of have an idea earlier on. You got your outliers like Josh Allen, where, it takes like a few years for them to really get rolling, but more or less you kind of know earlier whether you got a guy or not. But I think cornerback is one of those where you do have to continue to let them develop a bit.
Gotcha. Good stuff, man. We got to move quick. And I know we're going to circle back around to the quarterback to wrap up here in a second. But I do want to say this. I want to ask you this question. With Alexander, Douglas, and Stokes, let's say they're all 3 healthy. Where do you got each of those guys playing? Are you saying that you would play Stokes over Douglas on the boundary, or you would play Douglas over Stokes on the boundary right now?
For 2023 or for right now?
Yeah, 2023.
For 2023, man, I don't have a good plan, but I would be interested in trying to shop Rasul for some sort of capital, maybe do a player for player trade. Maybe there's a team that has some safeties and they have a lack of options at boundary corner, and if it's a good team that he'd be willing to go play for, maybe that's a win-win. I just think that it's not prudent management of the assets you have to be paying 3 boundary corners when you can only play 2 of them. And yeah, in a perfect world where you don't have roster limits and you don't have salary cap that you have to allocate to all 53 spots on your roster every year, sure, yeah, let's have backup boundary corners who are paid like starters. But I just think that we have enough holes elsewhere on the team that I can't be playing with those kinds of luxuries.
Cool.
If the roster looked like it did last year, yeah, why not? You're getting great production from basically everywhere on the field. Sure, you can afford to pay your backup corner whatever you want to. But when we have as many holes as we feel like our roster does, I'm just not willing to. It's like keeping too many starters at any other position where you can't play them all. And I just don't, unless you're willing to put Jair in the slot, which the Packers don't seem to want to do. I just don't think that Stokes or Douglas are capable of being the slot. They've been trying to do that all year with Rasul, and it's not working. Yeah,
that makes complete sense. I respectfully disagree. I would keep Douglas over Stokes personally. Not that we have to get rid of one or the other, but my choice would be Douglas over Stokes for sure. And we stay in the nickel so often that I do consider 3 corners as starters personally. I understand what you're saying about the slot. Go ahead.
I think part of this is a difference in how you and I view Rasul. I think you have a higher opinion of Rasul than I do.
Absolutely.
I like him. I certainly like him as a leader and as a player, but I don't have him. I don't think he's one of our best players on defense.
Right.
Even fully healthy and playing on the boundary, I think that he's good.
It's just
but not
amazing
great.
too. Like you're one draft pick, one draft hit away from everything changing too. Like when you look at what the Patriots did, they drafted Jack Jones, I think's his name.
Yeah,
That dude's like one of the highest graded corners in the entire NFL right now as a rookie, and it's like you're just one of those players away from turning things around. So let's move on to safety here. Only got 2 returning as far as from what I've seen on Spotrac. You've got Darnell Savage, 47.6 PFF grade. I don't even.
horrible.
I'm so tired of talking about it, but and it's one thing to go PFF grade don't match what I'm watching. I've watched this all year long, and I'm going and we, on the post game show I'll be like, Savage horrible today. PFF grade hits, bam, it's there. When a dumb redneck from Tennessee can see it and it matches up with the PFF data, it's like I don't understand why we cannot say, you know what, let's shake things up. But it is what it is. He's returning next year, like we talked about. Cap hits a little under $8 million. Like JJ pointed out, if they trade him, it does travel. Maybe they can get something out of him. You free that off the books. I mean, that's freaking huge. That's a game changer there. Not that they will, but and you've also got Scott, who had no grade on PFF. And obviously, you want to carry a minimum of 4 safeties on the roster. You guys have heard me talk about it. I would like to see him re-sign Rudy Ford and give him, you could get a real nice contract, guarantee some money, and it be discounted from a salary cap hit perspective. But
So Rudy Ford is under contract for next year, I think. Is he not?
Really?
Well, hang on. He's not listed on Spotrac as an unrestricted free agency. So he signed. So he signed a 2-year contract with the Jaguars.
Right. They cut him.
Maybe he is a free agent.
Yeah, Spotrac is showing him as a unrestricted free agent. But of course, they were also showing Yash as an unrestricted free agent as well. So,
I see what's going on. Hang on, Spotrac is listing him by his legal first name, Jonathan Ford. That's what threw me off because we have another Jonathan Ford on the roster. So I just automatically thought, okay, so yeah, nope, carry on. So it's Savage and Vernon Scott. You're right.
Yeah. So safety, guys, safety has got to be one of those top needs. And as we wrap up defense here, the needs I have, JJ, minimum needs: 1 defensive lineman, 1 corner, 2 safeties. But how do you see the safety position? How do you want to see it handled?
Dude, I don't know what you do with the safety position because I was baffled they didn't draft a safety this past year.
Same, yeah.
I was baffled that they didn't give Adrian Amos a new contract, and I think that his age probably has to do with that. And you have seen him fall off a bit this year. I think that there is a decent argument that I would listen to for letting him walk. I also wouldn't be mad if they brought him back. But it has baffled me the last 2 years that they, with the way his contract, keeps getting restructured and they keep pushing money out further and further into these void years. It didn't make any sense to me. He's going to be on the books for us once he's not on the roster for a hefty amount. And I'm saying, listen, if we're already paying for a guy that I want on the team to not be here, let's just tack on some actual real years instead of these void years. You get the same cap benefit. But I don't understand not bringing him back, despite the fact that his play has kind of gone down a bit this year. All our safeties are playing bad, and I'm not ready to say that. Well, Adrian Amos's struggles are specifically on him. All our safeties are bad. I have questions about our safeties coach. I have some questions about the production of the entire secondary and the entire defense and the entire roster as a whole. They're all playing kind of worse than they were last year. Amos's regression is not significant enough to me to panic right now. He has been playing poorly overall, but that largely has to do with the consistency. And I don't look at his level of play as really being tied to any kind of a drop off in age. I think he's in a bit of a funk, and the whole safety room seems to be in a funk. And I think that rather than just moving on from players that we have reason to believe are good, let's figure out what the heck is causing this stink in the safety room. Right. It's absolutely wild to me that the safeties are playing worse this year than they were last year when they didn't have a freaking position coach.
Yeah.
So I don't know what Ryan Downard is doing with those guys. I don't know, why the safeties are struggling so much. I've tried to have Sam Holman explain to me, a bunch of times, like, all right, how hard is this defensive scheme on the safeties? And he's, make some allowances for, yes, it is asking a lot of the safeties, but also they are drastically underperforming. So I would like to bring Amos back. We are handcuffed to Savage. You're going to have those two guys back, but I don't understand why we didn't draft a safety this past season. I felt that it was one of my top priorities for the offseason was find a third safety, and they really didn't. Thank God that we got Rudy Ford right now, because I think he's playing excellent football. I think he should be getting a lot of playing time. I think he should be playing over Savage right now. But the safety room, in my opinion, is a disaster, and I think that all the leadership of the Packers, they really need to sit down and do some heavy soul searching on what the heck is wrong with our safeties, and we need to make it a priority in the 2023 offseason to make sure we are fielding a competent safety room for the 2023 regular season. Because honestly, yes, the regression that we're seeing from these guys is more than we would have expected, but I don't think the overall production we're seeing from the safety room is too far off from kind of what we were viewing as being a real potential, because we had a lot of concern about you're really only going into the season with two safeties. What happens when one of them gets hurt? You need more than two safeties on your freaking roster, and we have questions about one of them, big questions, and then the other guy is getting up there in age. So I don't understand why the safeties were so neglected this past season. But I think that is squarely on Brian Gutekunst for not doing more to bolster the safeties, because we all talked about it in the offseason that what you have is not okay for the 2022 season in the safety room. And it's gone worse than we thought it would even.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for me personally, yeah, bring Amos back for the right price, but that's going to be a big drop in salary for me. Savage, like you said, we're stuck with him unless a trade, happens. Safety, in my opinion, that second tier of positions is defensive tackle, middle linebacker, and free safety. Those are right down the center of the defense needs to be stout. You've got that in Devondre Campbell. I truly believe that. Now, Quay Walker, still kind of up in the air. But you've got Campbell right in the middle. Kenny Clark has underperformed, and the safeties have played horrible. That is why this defense has underperformed, in my opinion. So This offseason, go out and spend some money on safety. Spend some money or some draft capital. And that's the only thing, too, just because you draft, a first-round pick at safety doesn't mean they're going to be great, especially in year one. So if we're going to compete next year, you're going to have to really take some money and put it into safety. So, all right, good stuff.
We only got two guys under contract for 2023 for safety, Darnell Savage and Vernon Scott, who I don't think you would agree both are horrible. And you need 4 or 5 safeties on your 53-man roster. You have 0 that you feel comfortable starting. So you got to add a minimum of 2 guys that you feel you can start. Granted, they're probably still going to start Savage next year. Maybe this whole slot cornerback experiment does pan out, and you think you found something you can do with him. But right now, if we're looking at where the biggest ground needs to be made up on the entire roster, if you need 4 safeties you can play and you got 0, that's where I'd start. So definitely agree on spending some money in free agency, and you got to draft another guy for the future.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're just going to breeze over special teams really quick here. Specialists, I should say. Mason Crosby not under contract next year, so the kicker slot is open as it sits right now. The fact that they've brung several kickers in for workouts, you're carrying Nordine on the practice squad, kind of makes me think that Mason has told them, hey, this might be the last year. If that's the case, he and Rodgers are kind of attached at the hip just as much as Bakhtiari is. I kind of feel like when Rodgers goes, Crosby goes, and vice versa. So I'm not saying Crosby won't be back, but right now he's not on the roster to the best of my knowledge. Pat O'Donnell will be back. I think he's a solid punter. I want to see him on the roster. And long snapper Coco, man, he's come in and done a great job. And then amazing, we kind of fixed that issue, right? for the most part. So
Yeah, and Coco is under contract, so that's the long snapper is the only special position I think that you actually have locked up. Is O'Donnell under contract next year? I guess he is.
he is,
I guess
yeah.
O'Donnell is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, he definitely is. So your holder is good to go. Your long snapper is good to go. Does Mason want to come back or not? If he doesn't, then obviously you take those swings there with the kicker position, like they have with practice squad players, things like that, constant tryouts.
Yeah.
And then
and I like Ramiz. You know, if he's our option next year, I think that's fine. They have the last couple of years, you can have seen they have been trying to find that guy that they could set up for the next year, because Mason's been up in the air and you don't know every year, like, because he keeps getting older and older. Is he going to retire? I think that they thought they maybe had something in JJ Molson. So,
Right.
you know, the fact that didn't work out, you know, they're trying this year with Ramiz Ahmed, and I like him. You know, we'll have to see if they still feel, you know, the same way about him in this coming off season. But I think they will probably have a kicking competition anyways, and have 3 or 4 camp bodies at kicker, provided that Mason isn't back. Which I think, you know, given his age, given you know, like you said, with the changeover with Rodgers, and he has bounced back this year. Mason has, but the fact that he's a free agent, I think it's more likely than not that he retires at the end of the season.
Got it. Good stuff, man. So as we wrap up this segment, guys, and we're going to get out of here real soon, essentially you've got, in my opinion, bare minimum 9 needs: 1 wide receiver, 3 tight ends, 1 defensive lineman, 1 corner, 2 safeties, and a kicker. You got 8 draft picks coming up. You got a first rounder that's going to allocate to about $4 million against the cap as it sits right now, being a top 10 pick. So you've got that first rounder, you got a second rounder, a third rounder, a fourth rounder, a fifth rounder, no 6th rounder, but you got 3 7ths, 1 coming from the LA Rams, 1 coming from Jacksonville, and 1 being the Packers' true 7th round pick. So 40 players on the roster. The goal is to reach 51. 51 is what the top 51 players on the roster is what goes towards the salary cap. Keep in mind, you've got your practice squad future contracts that are going to come into play. Again, 8 draft picks. As it sits right now, according to Spotrac, negative $3.1 million cap space for 2023. As JJ pointed out, over the cap shows them 3 in the positive. You've got roughly 40-some million in simple restructures that can happen. 70 million that, you know, hit the 70 million in cap space for like extreme restructures. We don't even want to think about that. We don't even really think about the 40 million, but I think it's very, very safe to say that in the blink of an eye, the Packers can come up with anywhere from $10 to $20 million in cap space this offseason to work with.
Yep.
Now, as we circle around, JJ, quarterback, you wanted to talk about quarterback, right? And we're going to wrap this big bear up. What was it you wanted to talk about with quarterback? I'm sure it was around Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, how to approach that moving forward, or what was on your mind?
Right. Well, so you know, you made a comment in passing that I think you said you were quoting a tweet from Ryan, which I hadn't seen that tweet, but talking about, you know, maybe we don't need to see more from Jordan Love because the Packers already know what they have in him.
Mhm.
And to me, that would be the only explanation for why they don't give him the playing time. You know, I think about like even like, you know, multiple halves and quarters in the preseason where you're just throwing away chances to see Love put reps out there and giving them to, you know, some meaningless backup quarterback who's not even going to be with you for much longer. Yeah, you know, and I think that there have been a lot of opportunities really squandered. You know, I think back to the first half of the Detroit Lions game last year, where the Packers clearly didn't care at all whether they won or lost that game. You know, by the fact that they pulled Aaron Rodgers at halftime, and they even were talking about how, like, well, it doesn't really matter because it's not going to affect our playoff seeding. And, you know, sure, you know, you look at it, you know, in hindsight and say, well, I guess playing at half didn't help Aaron Rodgers or the offense because they didn't do anything in the playoff game. But I think the whole thing should have been more of a consideration. We have to figure out what we have in Jordan Love because the Packers value their future at quarterback so highly, and they view that, you know, knowing who your quarterback is going to be.
Let me interrupt for just a second. That way, I got the tweet here just so you kind of know the context of it real quick. Conversation started, get about halfway through. Of course, Rodgers gets mentioned like every other tweet, but it came to Love, and Ryan was responding to a tweet, and he said, well, maybe they already do have an evaluation. That's entirely possible, in which case I guess we'll find out soon enough what the Packers have decided. Maybe that's why they aren't putting him in and letting Rodgers rest his thumb. They've seen enough. I came back and responded and said that would keep the leverage of an extension in favor of the Packers for sure. If they do think he is one, now would be the perfect time for an extension and stay away from that fifth-year option. Now also being this offseason, of course. And then Ryan said, well, yeah, that's assuming the assessment is positive. I was leaning the other way. But I think you're right. That'll be telling. If we find out Rodgers wants to retire and the Packers don't pull the trigger, it's looking like they are very much not confident. So we were just kind of going back and forth. I didn't want that tweet to come across in the comment earlier to misrepresent what Ryan was actually saying. That was the context of the conversation. I didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead though. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, no, that's cool. It helps. I agree with what you're saying about like forget Jordan Love's fifth-year option. Like I think it's going to be something like $20 million off the top of my head. I could be totally off on that, but I think it's like $20 million.
And like you pointed out, now we know that would travel if we traded him, so that's a little bit of a game changer. But I agree. I don't think we should pick it up. Go ahead.
Right. And I think, based on the fact that he hasn't really played at all, you could negotiate a much lower contract, give him a couple of years. I think Jordan probably would rather have an extra year or two of some security over, a few extra $1 million for 1 year. So you could do something with him and with his contract. I don't think they pick up his fifth year, but the fact remains there's absolutely, once you're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, there is no excuse to play Aaron Rodgers the rest of the season, and going in the most extreme direction possible. And in the favor of Rodgers, you say, if these games are meaningless, why are we risking his health? When we're putting him out there and he could break his collarbone again or something like that and cost us, the 2023 season with him. I don't think he's coming back next year because I think he's ready to hang it up and retire. That's my personal belief. We'll have to see. Aaron likes to prove me wrong, so we'll see what he does there. But I think that you have to get every ounce of information possible about Jordan Love before this draft season, because you are, unless something drastic changes, you are for the first time in decades going to be drafting in a position where you could take a swing. You could trade up, to draft any of the quarterbacks in this draft class that you want. And when you got a guy in this draft class like Bryce Young, who a lot of draft experts really view as one of those, bona fide can't miss prospects. And I don't have my official position yet publicly about what I think about Bryce Young. But the point being, you are never in this position as the Green Bay Packers where you have the option of drafting one of the top quarterbacks. You have to know what you think you have in Jordan Love, because if you're still not sure and you actually think Bryce Young is the guy, you have to go get him if you're in position to take him, because quarterback is that important. So I, looking at it and I hear you saying that, you're not a big fan of the, the first round picks, and you would rather trade out of it. Let me just say, if you had the number one overall pick, all right, and you're saying that what you really like is like fourth round picks, you could get 25 fourth round picks for the value of that number one. So I'm just saying, look, if nothing else, from here on out, if I'm Brian Gutekunst, once you're mathematically eliminated, the trade value, if nothing else, of an earlier pick is just it's so insane. So if you look at the Rich Hill trade chart, the number one overall pick is worth 1,000 points. The number 3 overall pick is worth 514 points. So double just by moving 2 spots back. So when you're talking about, if we're at the very end of the season, I think the last game we play of the season is the Lions. If you're looking at that and you're saying, this is a winnable game, I'm just telling you, if I am Brian Gutekunst, not if I'm Matt LaFleur, but if I'm Brian Gutekunst, I am telling Matt LaFleur, hey, man, I'm sorry, but I just feel I have to bench our entire starting offensive line and Kenny Clark and Jay. I'm benching everybody. You're going to be playing Darnell Savage at quarterback because, man, if we're in a position where it's like we're either picking first or sixth, depending on whether we win or lose this game, I'm sorry, if you are Brian Gutekunst, it is malpractice to not do everything you can to, triple or quadruple the value of that pick. And by the way, I just showed the difference between the number 1 and the number 3. it drops off so quickly after that. You only have to get down to the number 9 pick before you're looking at the first round pick being 3 times as valuable. So it is
That's
crazy
amazing.
just in how valuable it is. And listen, if the first pick in the first round is worth 1,000 points, the number 31 pick, which is the final pick this year since Miami forfeits their pick, it's only worth 190 points, which is less than a fifth of the value of the first round of the number 1 overall. So I hear what you're saying, that you're not crazy about the value of the first round picks, but let me tell you, no matter how you want to approach it, whether it's you want to go ahead and draft that guy you think is that good, or you want to trade back, the higher up you get, it's insane how much more value you get by being just even a couple picks earlier if you're trying to trade back and acquire more picks to restock all these different parts of the roster. So I just want to throw that out there and say that you have to figure out what the heck you have in Jordan Love, and then the second you're mathematically eliminated, not if you're Matt LaFleur, not if you're any of the players, but if you are Brian Gutekunst specifically, it is in your best interest to make sure that you lose every single game you can the second you're no longer in playoff contention. Right. I want Matt LaFleur still trying to win every game possible. I don't want him tanking, but I want Brian Gutekunst to be absolutely thinking that way.
Yeah, he's going to get rid of the hot. It's going to be like Brian Gutekunst is going to swoop in like the owner for the Cleveland Indians on Major League, right, and just start taking things away, like no hot water. They got they got the trolley motor in the or the bass boat motor in the whirlpool, trying to create some ball, all that good stuff.
Classic.
Man, what a fascinating, great movie. This has been a great conversation, JJ, man. I really appreciate your time. And moving forward, it's going to be interesting. And the reason we wanted to do this pod today is because, we're doing Chalk Talk. We're outlining what went right, what went wrong. There's a lot of division in, Packer Twitter especially, which there's always division on Twitter. It is what it is. And should Aaron Rodgers sit? Should Aaron Rodgers start? Blah, blah, blah. Why not talk about something exciting, and that's the future? Let's just take a look ahead and say, all right, what's 2023 look like? And we'll do this again next Saturday. We'll come up with a topic. It'll be something good. It might not necessarily be around the salary cap or roster building, but we'll come up with a great topic. It might be free agency like we discussed. But again, when you're digging into this stuff, looking in the future, it gives you things to watch for on Sunday. Again, what I'm looking for is Devontae Wyatt. I'm looking to see how he plays. Enagbare, looking to see how he plays. Looking to see how McDuffie does. And then, of course, what's going to happen in that slot position with Stokes out? Do you put Rasul on the boundary? And do you play Savage in the slot and give Rudy Ford a shot there? And maybe that answers some question for safety moving forward. So with that being said, we're going to get out of here, man. We'll probably split this pod up into 2. So when you're hearing this, expect the second one to drop. If it's not on the same day, we'll get it out in a couple of days to you guys. And we'll be back tomorrow for the post-game show immediately following the Packers-Cowboys game. We'll open it up to another roundtable for other guys in the PackerNet network here. So if anybody wants to jump on and join us for that post-game show, JJ, you're welcome. Anybody who's welcome, we'll get you on and we'll talk about how the game unfolded. So we're going to get out of here. Thank you all for taking the time to hang out with us here on YouTube and Twitter. Thanks for contributing in the chat for sure. And also thanks to everyone who's listening to this on pod. It should drop around – at least the first half will drop around noon Central Time here on Saturday. So everybody have a great day. As always, let's go out and be the change we want to see in the world. Go Pack, go.
Inches to go. DeVader, 17 to 14.